Frostfire Fates. A whimsical paranormal rom-com bursting with elemental chaos, fiery banter, and sizzling chemistry. By Win Valentine. I hype. Copyright 2025 by Win Valentine. All rights reserved. No part of this publication may be reproduced, stored, or transmitted in any form by any means, electronic, mechanical, photocopying, recording, scanning, or otherwise without written permission from the publisher. It is illegal to copy this book, post it to a website, or distribute it by any other means without permission. This novel is entirely a work of fiction. The names, characters, and incidents portrayed in it are the work of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, events or localities, is entirely coincidental. Win Valentine asserts the moral right to be identified as the author of this work. Designations used by companies to distinguish their products are often claimed as trademarks. All brand names and product names used in this book and on its cover are trade names, service marks, trademarks, and registered trademarks of their respective owners. The publishers and the book are not associated with any product or vendor mentioned in this book. None of the companies referenced within the book have endorsed the book. Book cover by Dana Sacco. Chapter 1: Sparks and Tethers. The magical energy pulsed like a second heartbeat in Riven's chest, drawing him deeper into the searing hollow. His boots crunched over blackened earth and chunks of volcanic glass, each step releasing tiny wisps of steam. The heat didn't bother him, being a phoenix shifter had its perks, but the waves of distorted air made navigation tricky, turning the cavern into a maze of shimmering mirages. "This better be worth it," he muttered, ducking under a low-hanging stalactite that glowed orange from within. His collection of travel trinkets clinked softly in his pocket, a familiar comfort in the otherworldly environment. The pull grew stronger, more insistent. Riven's amber eyes narrowed as he caught a flash of crystalline light ahead. He quickened his pace, nearly stumbling over a ridge of obsidian rocks that looked deceptively stable but crumbled like burnt sugar under his weight. And there it was, a fragment of the resonant heart no bigger than his palm, nestled in a cradle of black glass. The crystal pulsed between deep crimson and frost blue, each color shift accompanied by a note of haunting music that seemed to bypass his ears and resonate directly with his phoenix nature. The melody stirred something primal in his chest, like the first spark of resurrection fire. "Oh, that's not ominous at all," Riven said, but he was already moving closer, drawn by an impulse he couldn't, or didn't want to, resist. He reached out, his fingers hovering over the crystal's surface. Just grab it and go. Simple enough, right? The moment his fingertips brushed the fragment, fire exploded through his veins. Not the controlled warmth he was used to, but wild, ancient power that threatened to burn him from the inside out. His phoenix form rippled beneath his skin, desperate to break free. "Okay, not simple, definitely not simple." Riven gasped as the magic surge triggered a chain reaction. The ground beneath his feet began to tremble and crack, revealing veins of molten rock that spread like hungry fingers. Nearby obsidian rocks melted into bubbling pools of lava, releasing clouds of ash and glowing embers into the air. Riven stumbled back, struggling to contain the fire racing through his body. His hair glowed like burning copper, and sparks danced between his fingers. "Come on, get it together," he growled through gritted teeth. "You're supposed to control the fire, not the other way around." The air thickened with heat and power, until it felt like breathing in liquid flame. Through the haze of ash and embers, a new light began to take shape, ethereal, flickering, and somehow both there and not there at the same time. The spectral figure that materialized made Riven's phoenix senses scream in recognition. It shifted constantly between human and bird forms, its golden eyes blazing with an intensity that put the surrounding lava to shame. Each movement left trails of ghostly fire in the air, and its voice when it spoke carried the sharp crack of burning wood. Another phoenix shifter, drawn to power you don't understand. The spirit's flames dimmed with disapproval as it regarded Riven. The echo, because what else could it be, wore its disdain like a cloak of smoldering embers. "Let me guess," Riven said, trying to mask his discomfort with bravado. Corwin Emberthrush? Your reputation precedes you. He flexed his fingers, willing the unwanted fire to subside. Though I have to say, the whole dramatic entrance thing. A bit much? Corwin's form flickered more rapidly, his spectral flames pulsing with irritation. You jest in the face of forces that could tear you apart. Typical. His voice carried centuries of weariness. Your kind never changes, always reaching for power without considering the consequences. My kind? Riven couldn't help but bristle at that. Last I checked, you were a phoenix shifter too. Or were. And I'm not reaching for power, I'm trying to fix whatever's wrong with the resonant heart before this whole place falls apart. A burst of laughter like crackling flames. Fix it? Just as I tried to fix it? Corwin's form stabilized briefly in his human aspect, though his edges still flickered with ghostly fire. Look how well that turned out. Riven glanced pointedly at the chaos around them, the spreading lava, the thickening ash, the crystal fragment still singing its siren song of power. Yeah, well, no offense, but maybe you could have left better instructions than, don't touch the shiny magical object for the next person who came along. Riven's skin felt too tight, like his phoenix form was trying to claw its way out from beneath. He focused on his breathing, the way his meditation teacher had drilled into him years ago. In, hold out. Simple. Except nothing was simple when ancient magic coursed through your veins like liquid lightning. Getting a little warm in here, isn't it? He quipped, though his voice came out strained. The fragment pulsed faster in response to his agitation, its song climbing to a higher pitch. Tiny flames sprouted around his feet, dancing across the obsidian floor like mischievous sprites. Corwin's spectral form circled him, trailing wisps of ethereal fire that cast strange shadows on the cavern walls. The heart is not merely a source of power, the echo intoned. It is the fulcrum upon which all of Evergloam's elemental forces balance. Each fragment holds echoes of that greater purpose. Yeah? Could have fooled me. Riven winced as another surge of energy sent sparks cascading from his fingertips. Feels more like a magical time bomb. Your flippancy masks fear. Corwin's form flickered rapidly, his golden eyes intense. I sense it in you, the same arrogance I once possessed, the belief that fire alone could master the heart's power. The ghost's voice took on a hollow quality that made Riven's bones ache. I was wrong. Fire without frost brings only destruction. The balance must be restored or all will burn. The word struck a nerve, and Riven's phoenix instincts flared defensively. I'm nothing like you, he snapped, but the fragment responded to his spike of emotion, its melody twisting into something sharp and discordant. The sound pierced his skull like needles of ice, ironic given the inferno building inside him. More fires sprang up around the chamber, feeding off his loss of control. The heat grew oppressive even for him, and sweat trickled down his temples. Okay, fine, maybe I could use some constructive criticism. Got any actual advice hidden in all those cryptic warnings? Corwin's form began to thin, becoming more transparent with each passing second. You must prove yourself worthy of the Phoenix gift, he said, his voice heavy with ancient regret, or you'll repeat my failures. The echo's golden eyes dimmed like dying embers. The power to destroy is easy. The wisdom to create balance, that is the true test. Wait, Riven reached out, but his hand passed through Corwin's dissipating form. You can't just drop something like that and disappear. What am I supposed to? But the echo was already gone, leaving nothing but a faint trace of spectral fire that quickly faded to smoke. The sudden silence felt oppressive, broken only by the fragment's continuing song, a melody that now seemed to mock him with its alternating notes of fire and frost. Riven stared at the crystal, its pulsing light reflecting in his amber eyes. His power thrummed beneath his skin, eager to be unleashed, but for the first time since discovering his abilities, that raw potential felt more like a liability than a gift. Control the fire, don't let it control you, he muttered, repeating his old mantra. But as he watched the flames dance around him, fed by power he couldn't fully contain, a sobering realization settled in his gut. His phoenix abilities alone weren't enough. Not for this. The fragment's song shifted again, and Riven could have sworn it sounded almost expectant. as if it was waiting for something or someone to complete its melody. The alternating pulses of crimson and frost blue suddenly made a lot more sense, and he couldn't help but laugh at the cosmic joke of it all. Fire without frost brings only destruction, he repeated, running a hand through his ember-bright hair. Message received, universe. Message definitely received. The fragment continued its eerie song, unchanged by his epiphany. Around him, the smaller fires began to die down as his control reasserted itself, but the underlying tension remained. The power within the crystal called to his phoenix nature like a siren's song, promising strength, promising renewal, promising everything except what he now knew he needed most. Balance. Ayla knelt by the crystalline pool, her fingertips tracing delicate ice runes along its stone rim. The silver trees of the whispering woods swayed around her, their wind chime melody a soothing backdrop to her work. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting ethereal patterns across the water's surface that seemed to dance with her magic. Third quadrant stabilized, she murmured, watching the latest rune pulse with a soft blue glow. A small smile tugged at her lips as she observed the precise geometric patterns taking shape. Each frozen sigil connected to the next in a perfect lattice of magical resonance, exactly as she'd planned. The pool's surface remained mirror still, undisturbed by even the gentlest breeze. Ayla had spent weeks studying the echo disturbances in this area, mapping their frequencies and designing this containment array. One wrong stroke could destabilize the entire. A violent pull yanked at her core, sending liquid fire coursing through her veins. Ayla gasped, her hand jerking mid-rune. The foreign sensation felt like molten metal being poured through her typically frost-lined channels of magic. No, not now, she hissed, trying to maintain her focus as the tether dragged at her essence. Her carefully maintained posture crumpled as another surge of heat rippled through her body. The runes she'd spent hours crafting began to pulse in warning, sensing an approaching magical signature that was decidedly not ice-aligned. Ayla stumbled to her feet, one hand pressed against her sternum where the burning sensation seemed strongest. Her boots slipped on the now slick stone as the temperature around the pool began to rise dramatically. The pristine frost patterns started to weep, perfect crystalline structures dissolving into mere droplets. Right on cue, Riven Ashmore burst into the glade like a miniature sun going supernova. Wisps of smoke curled from his shoulders, and the very air around him shimmered with heat distortion. His boots left slightly scorched impressions in the grass as he strode forward, apparently oblivious to the havoc his mere presence was wreaking on her work. "There you are," he called out, as if they'd planned this little encounter. "I've been looking all over." "Do you mind?" Ayla cut him off, her tone as sharp as an icicle. She gestured to the rapidly deteriorating rune array, where hours of precise magical engineering was quite literally going down the drain. The temperature differential between them had created a misty haze, turning the once clear air into a humid soup. "Oh." He at least had the grace to look somewhat chagrined, though he made no attempt to step back. "Sorry about that. But we've got bigger problems than some melty ice art." "Melty ice?" Ayla pressed her fingers to her temples where a headache was forming. "These are containment runes for the echo disturbances, which I've spent 3 days calibrating. Which are now." She watched as another section of the array dissolved into useless puddles. Completely ruined. Riven ran a hand through his already disheveled hair, sending a few ember-like sparks into the air. "Look, I wouldn't have crashed your little winter wonderland if it wasn't important. There's something you need to see. Whatever it is can wait until I stabilize this node." Ayla knelt again, trying to salvage what remained of her work. She pressed her palm to the stone, channeling her power to reinforce the failing runes. A fresh layer of frost spread from her touch, only to immediately start melting as Riven took another step closer. "It really can't," he insisted. "And you might want to stop doing that, because this tether thing isn't going to let up until we deal with it." As if to prove his point, another surge of heat pulsed through their connection, strong enough to make Ayla's teeth clench. The remaining runes flared brilliant blue in protest before fizzling out entirely, leaving nothing but wet stone and wasted effort. "Fantastic," Ayla rose slowly, brushing droplets of water from her skirts. You do realize that destabilizing these nodes could have serious magical consequences for the entire area? More serious than the resonant heart fragment I just found? Riven raised an eyebrow, the amber of his eyes catching the moonlight like actual flames. That got her attention. You found a fragment? Where? Searing Hollow. And before you start lecturing me about proper magical containment protocols, he held up a hand as Ayla opened her mouth to do exactly that. Maybe we should focus on why this Riven seems really insistent about us working together right now. Ayla watched in mounting frustration as Riven took another step closer, examining one of her melting runes with far too much casual interest. A perfectly crafted snowflake pattern dissolved into a sad puddle under his scrutiny. Sorry about that, he said, not sounding remotely apologetic as he crouched down for a better look. The stone actually sizzled where his fingertips brushed it. Her carefully maintained composure cracked. With a swift, precise gesture, Ayla conjured a crystalline barrier between them, its surface catching moonlight in prismatic patterns. Stay right there, walking furnace. Some of us prefer our magic unmelted. The satisfaction of his startled expression lasted approximately 3 seconds before she noticed her barrier beginning to sweat. Droplets formed and ran down its surface like tears, and the edges started to blur and soften. Wonderful! Their clashing energies seemed to agitate the pool beside them. Its mirror-smooth surface fractured into choppy waves, reflecting disjointed images that made her head spin, tongues of flame dancing with shards of ice, red and blue light warring for dominance. Above them, the silver tree's usual gentle melody shifted to something more urgent, almost warning-like. Looks like we're stuck together, Ice Queen. Riven's grin was entirely too pleased for someone who'd just demolished hours of careful spellwork. He took an experimental step backward, and Ayla felt the tether between them pull taut. Her boots actually skidded forward an inch on the wet stone before she caught herself. Don't call me that, she muttered, trying to maintain some dignity while fighting the magical rope that seemed determined to drag her closer to the human torch. She took a deliberate step back, and felt the tether yank in response. Would you prefer Frost Princess? Snow Sorceress? I've got plenty more. I would prefer you take this seriously. But even as she spoke, Ayla had to sidestep quickly, as Riven's attempt to move away pulled her off balance again. Her usually immaculate hair was starting to curl in the humid microclimate their opposing energies had created. She could feel it frizzing around her face, completely ruining her carefully maintained image of cool composure. They ended up circling the pool like participants in some absurd dance, neither willing to close the distance, neither able to fully retreat. The tether kept them in an awkward orbit, their powers creating a foggy haze where hot and cold air collided. I am taking this seriously, Riven said, though his amber eyes still sparkled with amusement. But you have to admit, this is pretty funny. You're literally giving me the cold shoulder. That was terrible. Ayla tried to smooth her rebellious hair, only to have another wave of heat make it spring right back up. And this situation is far from funny. The echo disturbances are getting worse, that fragment you found could be dangerous, and now we're stuck in some magical game of tug-of-war while my containment array turns into a wading pool. She gestured at the ruins of her work. The melted runes had formed new patterns around their feet, swirling designs that looked almost deliberate, as if the magic itself was mocking their standoff. In the pool's agitated surface their reflections wavered, fire and ice, locked in an eternal dance of opposition. Look, Riven said, finally dropping some of his levity. We can stand here all night arguing about personal space, or we can figure out why this Riven thinks we need to work together. Your choice, Snowflake. Ayla closed her eyes briefly, counting backward from 10. When she opened them, Riven was still there, still radiating enough heat to make her ice barrier look more like a water feature, still watching her with that infuriating mix of amusement and challenge. The worst part was, he had a point. But she wasn't about to admit that out loud. Fine, she said instead, keeping her tone professionally crisp, despite the way her hair was now doing its best impression of a storm cloud. But we establish some ground rules first. Starting with the minimum safe distance to prevent any more magical interference. Afraid I'll make you melt? The words were teasing, but something in his expression made her pulse jump in a way that had nothing to do with their magical tether. Ayla reinforced her ice barrier, even though it was fighting a losing battle against his ambient heat. I'm afraid you'll destabilize any delicate magical working within a 10-foot radius, as you've already demonstrated quite thoroughly. The silver tree's chimes reached a particularly insistent crescendo, as if trying to tell them both to stop being ridiculous. Their reflections in the pool seemed to blur together, fire and ice merging into something new and undefined. Neither of them moved. The tether hummed between them, waiting. Juliet's day had been perfectly normal, well, normal for a witch's apothecary that specialized in temperamental potions and enchanted oddities, until her doorbell burst into an impromptu jazz solo. The magical chimes, usually content with a simple melody, were now scatting like they'd discovered caffeine. What in the name of Newton's physics-defying cat? She peered over her spectacles just as the most fascinating duo she'd ever seen stumbled through her door. The tall, smoldering, literally was that smoke coming from his jacket, man prowled in first, followed by an ethereally beautiful woman who seemed to be leaving frost patterns with each careful step. Her enchanted broom, Maurice, immediately abandoned its half-hearted dusting routine and zoomed over to investigate, sweeping enthusiastically at their feet. Maurice? We talked about personal space. Juliet called out, but the broom just twirled happily between them, causing the pair to do an awkward dance to avoid tripping. The temperature in the shop went absolutely bonkers. On her left, the perfectly precise passion potions started bubbling like hot tubs, their previously pale pink contents shifting to a dangerous-looking magenta. On her right, delicate frost patterns crept up her collection of mindfully measured meditation mixtures, turning the bottles into miniature ice sculptures. Juliet felt her already unruly purple hair begin to expand as the humidity levels rose dramatically. "Oh, sweet merciful Mercury," she muttered, patting uselessly at her rapidly growing purple cloud. "I'm going to look like a shocked Pomeranian in about 30 seconds. Then she noticed something even more intriguing, the way the pair moved in perfect, if reluctant, synchronization, maintaining an exact 3-foot distance like some sort of supernatural dance partners. "Oh my stars, you two are literally hot and cold." The words burst out of her as she bounced excitedly behind her counter, nearly knocking over her collection of enchanted rubber ducks. This is better than a romance novel. It's like Pride and Prejudice meets Fire and Ice meets, oh. Are you tethered? Please tell me you're tethered. The woman, who radiated the kind of composure Juliet had only ever achieved accidentally through a misfired calming draft, cleared her throat. "We require supplies for echo tracking. Specifically, anything designed to..." A loud pop interrupted her, as several bottles on the seasonal sensations shelf began changing colors like disco lights. The man winced, running a hand through his ember-bright hair. "Sorry about that." "Riven," the ice woman said with practiced patience, "perhaps you could step away from the temperature-sensitive items?" "Kind of impossible, Ayla, unless you'd like to be dragged along with me." He gestured between them. "You know, because of the whole magical force proximity situation you're trying so hard to pretend isn't happening?" Juliet could barely contain her delight as she dove into her storage area, various magical charms jingling like excited wind chimes. Compatible opposites. "Oh, this is just, where did I put those echo tracking crystals?" "No, that's my collection of sentient scarves. The universe has such a fantastic sense of humor sometimes." She tossed items over her shoulder, a tap-dancing teapot, a mirror that only showed yesterday's reflections, and a jar of what appeared to be pickled shooting stars. "The supplies?" Ayla prompted, her cool tone somewhat undermined by the way she had to sidestep closer to Riven to avoid a flying, enchanted umbrella. "Right? Yes. Professional. I can do that." Juliet straightened up, adjusted her askew glasses, and promptly knocked over a stack of Comprehensive Guide to Uncommon Curses, now with more uncommon curses. A suspicious gurgling sound drew everyone's attention to the ancient cauldron in the corner, the one Juliet's grandmother had sworn was just temperamental, not actually possessed. Its contents began to bubble ominously, green sparks shooting from its rim as Riven's ambient heat affected its contents. Ayla's reaction was instant. A crystalline shield of ice materialized between them and the cauldron. It was beautiful, really, the way the ice caught the light of the sparks. At least until it began melting, creating a puddle that Maurice the broom immediately began attacking with renewed vigor. "That's just showing off," Riven muttered, though Juliet noticed his lips twitching toward a smile. "Says the man who's turning my shop into a sauna," Ayla countered, maintaining the shield despite the constant melting. Oh. This reminds me of this romance novel I read where the Fire Prince and the Frost Princess had to. Juliet caught herself as both visitors turned to stare at her. Right? Echo tracking supplies. Coming right up. Though really, if you're interested in that book series. Juliet could barely contain her excitement as she rummaged through her collection of magical measuring devices. This was better than the time she'd accidentally created singing teacups that only performed Broadway hits. Her fingers closed around her favorite crystal pendulum, the one with the rainbow cord that her grandmother had sworn would never steer her wrong. Except for that one time with the tap-dancing toadstools, but really who could have predicted that? "Stand still, please." She held the pendulum between Riven and Ayla, watching in amazement as it spun like a caffeinated compass. "I haven't seen readings like this since that time I accidentally enchanted a fire salamander to fall in love with an ice sprite." "How did that work out?" Riven asked, leaning back against one of her display counters. The crystallized snowdrops she'd spent 3 weeks perfecting immediately drooped, their delicate petals wilting in the sudden heat. Ayla's hand twitched, and Juliet recognized the instinctive need to fix things. She had the same urge whenever her experimental potion started singing off-key. A wave of frost shot toward the flowers, but instead of restoring them, it just created a sad puddle of lukewarm water. They eloped to a temperate climate," Juliet answered, trying not to mourn her snowdrops too obviously. "Last I heard, they opened a steam room spa in Florida." She ducked behind her counter, pawing through her collection of specially reinforced bottles. Aha! The iridescent potion she pulled out caught the light like an oil slick made of rainbows. She'd brewed it during the last quarter moon, when the alignment was perfect for echo-tracking magic. Plus, she'd been particularly inspired that night after binge-watching supernatural romance movies. "Echo Essence Detector," she announced proudly, presenting the bottle. "Just don't let it get too hot." She eyed Riven, who had the decency to look slightly sheepish as another display began to steam. "Or too cold," she added, glancing at Ayla, whose perfectly composed expression didn't quite hide her annoyance at the situation. "Maybe take turns holding it." Maurice, her ever-helpful enchanted broom, chose that moment to attempt another zealous cleaning between the mismatched pair. Juliet winced as one end of its handle frosted over, while the other started smoking. "Maurice, come here, you poor thing." She rescued her overeager cleaning companion, giving it a sympathetic pat. The broom drooped in her hands, looking as dejected as a cleaning implement possibly could. "I know, sweetheart. Some messes are better left unswept." As her unusual customers prepared to leave, still maintaining that perfect 3-foot distance that screamed magical tether to anyone who knew what to look for, Juliet couldn't help herself. "Try not to melt any important magical artifacts," she called after them. "And if you need couples counseling, I know a great therapist who specializes in elementally challenged relationships." The look Ayla gave her could have frozen a volcano, while Riven's barely suppressed chuckle seemed to raise the shop's temperature another few degrees. Her enchanted doorbell, always one for dramatic timing, chose that moment to chime them out with what was unmistakably Hot and Cold by Katy Perry. Juliet burst into delighted laughter, watching frost patterns and scorch marks trail behind them as they left. The temperature in her shop gradually settled back to normal, though Maurice was still sulking in the corner, its frozen end slowly thawing while the smoking end sputtered out. "Well," she told her broom, picking up her grandmother's old recipe book. I suppose we should look up some temperature-resistant reinforcement spells. Something tells me those two will be back. She glanced at her wilted snowdrops and the puddle beneath them. And maybe some weatherproof displays while we're at it. The cauldron in the corner gave another suspicious gurgle, and Juliet sighed. Some days, she really wished she'd specialized in something simpler, like ghost whispering or dragon dentistry. But then again, where would be the fun in that? She pulled out her emergency stash of enchanted chocolate, guaranteed to fix magical mishaps, or at least make them more bearable, and settled in to reorganize her shop. The scorch marks on her counter traced an interesting pattern, almost like a heart if you tilted your head and squinted. Juliet grinned. Sometimes the universe really did have the best sense of humor. Chapter 2: Frosty Sparks. Riven tried not to take satisfaction in the way his presence made Ayla's carefully crafted ice formations melt. Really, he did. But there was something oddly entertaining about watching her precise, methodical approach literally dissolve in the face of his natural warmth. The trek through the whispering woods had been an exercise in mutual frustration. Their magical tether kept them within arm's reach, close enough that every step created a bizarre microclimate. Behind them, the forest looked like it couldn't decide between hosting a bonfire or an ice sculpture competition. "You're doing that on purpose," Ayla accused, watching another frozen fern wilt as he passed. "Breathing? Guilty as charged." Riven lifted his hands in mock surrender. "Should I try holding my breath?" She shot him a look that could have frozen lava. "You know exactly what I mean. Your temperature's been climbing steadily for the past 10 minutes. Maybe I'm just warming up to you," he quipped, immediately regretting it when she conjured a small flurry of snowflakes directly above his head. They finally reached the frozen embers entrance, a crystalline arch that somehow managed to look both welcoming and forbidding. Ayla immediately dropped to her knees, fingers tracing intricate patterns in the frost-covered ground. "These protection runes need to be perfect," she muttered, more to herself than to him. "The cavern's balance is delicate." Riven tried to stand still. He really did. But after about 30 seconds of watching her draw impossibly detailed ice symbols, his restless energy got the better of him. He took 3 steps to the left, and the first quarter of her work turned into a sad little puddle. "Seriously?" Ayla's voice carried that special kind of exasperation, reserved for particularly trying pupils. Or, apparently, fire-based magical beings who couldn't stay put. "Sorry?" He backed up, which only managed to melt a different section. "Maybe I could help? Could you possibly radiate a little less?" She was already redrawing the runes, her movements sharp with irritation. "Just think cool thoughts or something." Riven couldn't resist. He concentrated on raising his body temperature just slightly, watching with poorly concealed amusement as her ice crystals began to drip. "Cool thoughts. Right. Like beach days? Summer festivals? Roaring bonfires?" The look she gave him could have frozen hell itself. "You're impossible." "I prefer spontaneous or warm-hearted," he offered, earning himself another targeted snowfall. Undeterred, Ayla started work on an elaborate ice lattice, her hands weaving through the air as delicate crystal structures formed and interlocked. It was actually impressive, Riven had to admit. The magical matrix looked like something out of a winter fairy tale, catching and refracting light in mesmerizing patterns. He stepped closer to examine it, genuinely curious about the construction. The entire structure immediately began to weep, like a forgotten ice cream cone on a hot sidewalk. "That took me 20 minutes. Ayla's composed facade cracked slightly, as her masterpiece dissolved into a spectacular puddle. Riven couldn't help the smirk that tugged at his lips, even as the temperature around them rose another few degrees. "Maybe try something more heat-resistant?" "Oh, brilliant suggestion. Why didn't I think of that?" She rolled her eyes, but he caught the slight twitch at the corner of her mouth that suggested she wasn't quite as annoyed as she pretended to be. "Perhaps you'd like to share any other helpful insights about ice magic?" "Well, now that you mention it, He leaned against the cavern wall, trying not to notice how the frost there immediately began to recede. Have you considered working with steam instead? You're getting plenty of practice with it. Ayla's response was to pour even more power into her next attempt, creating an ice construct that practically hummed with magical energy. For 3 glorious seconds, it held steady despite Riven's proximity. Then it collapsed spectacularly, filling the entrance with a cloud of steam that turned the space into an impromptu sauna. Through the mist, Riven could just make out Ayla's silhouette, her usually perfect hair starting to curl in the humidity. You know, he offered, trying to sound helpful rather than amused, some cultures consider steam therapy very beneficial. A small avalanche of snow dropped on his head in response. And some cultures, Ayla replied sweetly, consider silence golden. Riven watched with growing fascination as Ayla attempted to maintain what she probably thought was a dignified distance between them. The magical tether, however, had other ideas. Every time she managed to get more than 6 feet away, an invisible force would yank her back toward him like a rubber band snapping into place. The resulting dance was nothing short of comedic. Step, slide, resist, repeat. She'd edge away to work on her frost patterns, get pulled back with an indignant huff, then try again from a different angle. All while pretending this wasn't the most ridiculous situation either of them had ever been in. This would be easier if you just, Ayla started, but her words cut off in a yelp as her boot hit a particularly slick patch of melted ice. Her arms pinwheeled gracefully, which somehow made the whole thing even funnier. Riven moved without thinking, closing the distance in 2 quick strides. He caught her around the waist, one hand steadying her elbow. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Every bit of frost within a 10-foot radius turned to steam with an audible hiss. Your timing is terrible, Ayla informed him, trying to sound composed despite the fact that she was practically in his arms. Steam rose in lazy spirals where his hands met her sleeve, and he could feel the chill of her skin even through the fabric. I'd say my timing was perfect, actually. He couldn't help grinning. Unless you were planning to test how well ice elementals bounce? She extracted herself from his grip with as much dignity as she could muster, but not before he noticed the slight flush creeping across her cheeks. Whether from embarrassment or their proximity, he couldn't tell. The frozen ember chose that moment to remind them why they were there, pulsing with ancient magic that sent waves of conflicting temperature through the cavern. Riven felt like he was simultaneously standing in a sauna and walking into a freezer. By Ayla's sudden shiver and subsequent wiping of sweat from her brow, she was experiencing the same disorienting sensation. Right, she muttered, squaring her shoulders. One more try. Riven watched as she poured her concentration into creating what had to be the most intricate frost shield he'd seen yet. The ice crystals formed perfect geometric patterns, spreading out like frozen lace. It was beautiful, really, the way the light caught each facet, the mathematical precision of each angle. He found himself stepping closer, drawn by both the tether and genuine curiosity. The shield held for exactly 3 seconds, before dissolving into a cloud of steam that had them both coughing. Are you doing this on purpose? Ayla demanded, turning to face him with her hands on her hips. Her hair had completely abandoned its usual perfect arrangement, curling wildly in the humid air. Riven whistled innocently, though the effect was somewhat ruined by the small flames that flickered to life in his footprints. Would I do that? Yes, she said flatly. Yes, you absolutely would. He couldn't exactly argue with that assessment. Especially not when he was having so much fun watching her perfectly controlled world literally melt around the edges. They ended up at an impasse, standing in what had to be the most confused patch of forest floor in the entire Whispering Woods. Under Ayla's feet the ground was frozen solid, crackling with layers of frost that spread outward like a winter bloom. Beneath his boots the earth was scorched and smoking slightly, giving off waves of heat that distorted the air. Between them lay a perfect ring of puddles, neither freezing nor evaporating, caught in the strange balance of their opposing forces. The frozen embers' pulses took on a different rhythm, almost like laughter. The ancient artifact was clearly enjoying their predicament, its glow alternating between warm amber and cool blue. "Well," Riven said brightly, watching another of Ayla's ice formations collapse into mist, "at least we're consistent." The look she gave him could have frozen a volcano. Consistently destructive, maybe. But he caught the slight quirk of her lips, the way her eyes sparkled despite her exasperation. "I prefer to think of it as consistently entertaining," he offered, deliberately taking one step closer just to watch her next ice crystal formation dissolve. "Besides, isn't this exactly what we're supposed to be figuring out? How to balance our powers?" "Balance?" Ayla repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "Is that what you call turning my careful magical constructs into a steam room?" Being dead had its perks, and watching the chaos unfold at Phantom Falls Market was definitely one of them. Zara drifted lazily above the crowd, enjoying the show as Evergloam's newest odd couple made their way through the stalls. On their left, Mrs. Whisperwind's prize-winning peaches crystallized with a delicate layer of frost. On their right, Mr. Thornberry's enchanted tapestries curled at the edges, wisps of smoke rising from their threads. The market vendors scrambled in their wake, muttering cleaning spells and repositioning their wares. "Perfect timing," Zara whispered to herself, counting down from 3 before dramatically materializing through old Grimsby's wind chime display. The ancient goblin merchant yelped, dropping his latest creation, a set of chimes that played different songs depending on your mood. Well, if it isn't Evergloam's hottest Cold War," she announced, her spectral form shimmering with delight as the chimes clattered against the cobblestones. Ayla's perfectly composed features tightened. "Zara, was that really necessary?" "Absolutely." Zara circled the pair, deliberately passing through their personal space. The sensation of Riven's fire magic sent a warm tingle through her ethereal form, while Ayla's frost magic made her spectral teeth chatter. "Ooh, toasty on this side, positively glacial over here. You two should rent yourselves out as a mobile climate control system." "Shouldn't you be haunting someone else?" Riven asked, but the twitch at the corner of his mouth betrayed his amusement. "And miss this entertainment? Not a chance." Zara floated over to Madame Moonshadow's fortune-telling booth, where the crystal ball had fogged up from their clashing temperatures. With practiced precision, she traced a heart with an arrow through it on the condensation. Ayla rolled her eyes, but Riven's poorly concealed laugh made the effort worth it. Madame Moonshadow, however, looked less than pleased about her crystal ball being used as a supernatural sketchpad. "Speaking of entertainment," Zara said, drifting alongside them as they approached a potion vendor's stall, "I saw something interesting earlier. Our favorite Phi troublemaker was skulking around the resonant heart's chamber." She let her form flicker slightly, watching their reactions with undisguised interest. Ayla's composure cracked. "Loose? When?" "Oh, just a little while ago." She seemed very invested in whatever she was doing there. Before either could respond, the magical tether between them suddenly activated. Riven had started toward a display of fire-resistant gloves, while Ayla examined some frost-enhanced crystals. The invisible force yanked them together, causing them to collide in the middle of the walkway. Zara couldn't have scripted it better herself. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced to no one in particular, "in this corner we have Fire Boy meets Ice Princess. Place your bets on who melts first." "Zara?" They snapped in unison, which only made her laugh harder. "Oh, look at that, you're already in sync. The tether works in mysterious ways." She floated upside down, her vintage polka dot dress defying gravity, as she grinned at their compromising position. Riven had somehow managed to catch Ayla around the waist, while she had braced herself against his chest. A nearby flower vendor's roses were simultaneously blooming from the heat and acquiring a delicate layer of frost. Being a ghost had given Zara an excellent eye for entertainment, and right now she was watching a premium show. Ayla approached a display of enchanted crystals with her usual graceful precision, only to have the delicate frost patterns she was examining melt the instant Riven leaned over her shoulder. "Fascinating," Zara muttered, pretending to scribble in an invisible notebook. Subject A attempts to maintain dignity, while Subject B unconsciously sabotages with excess hotness. And I mean that both literally and figuratively. Don't you have some chains to rattle somewhere else? Ayla asked, but her usual Ice Queen composure slipped as another crystal's frost patterns dissolved under her touch. Oh no, this is much better than chain rattling. Zara made a show of adjusting non-existent glasses. Though speaking of suspicious activities, she flipped upside down, hovering between them like a translucent acrobat. Did you know that Luce has been collecting echo fragments? Very hush-hush, very suspicious. She grinned wickedly. Almost as suspicious as this whole opposites attract situation you've got going on. Riven's attention snapped away from the melting crystals. Echo fragments? How many? Wouldn't you like to know? Zara sang, drifting through a rack of weather-sensitive charms. The magical items immediately went haywire, one side erupting in a localized snowstorm, while the other sparked with miniature lightning and summer heat. Perfect. She raised her arms like a conductor guiding the chaos. A little more snow on the left, darlings. And some thunder for dramatic effect. The charms obliged, creating a bizarre mixture of weather patterns that had nearby shoppers diving for cover. Zara, Ayla's tone carried a warning edge, this isn't a game. Everything's a game if you're dead long enough. Zara twirled through the magical storm. But fine, let's divide and conquer. You take the north side of the market, and Riven can. The tether activated before she could finish, yanking them together like cosmic magnets. Riven stumbled into Ayla, their elements clashing in a puff of steam. Distance makes the heart grow fonder. Zara proclaimed dramatically, floating above them, but magical tethers make it way more entertaining. The fragments, Zara? Ayla pressed, trying to maintain her professional demeanor despite being practically in Riven's arms. What exactly did you see Luce doing with them? Oh, you mean besides the obvious suspicious skulking? Zara drifted through a flower stall, causing the blooms to shiver. I'd say it was almost as suspicious as the steam you two generate. Speaking of which, she gestured to the fog now surrounding them, from their continued proximity. Could you focus for 5 minutes? Riven growled, which only made Zara laugh harder. Says the walking furnace to the ghost. She pirouetted through another display, scattering enchanted trinkets. But your explosive chemistry is much more interesting than Luce's late-night activities. Though I must say, things are getting pretty steamy in this situation. Zara? They shouted in unison. Ooh, stereo exasperation. You're really getting this couple thing down. She began fading through the nearest wall, her signature mischievous grin the last thing visible. By the way, you two should really check out the memory market during the full moon, assuming you haven't melted each other by then. Her laughter echoed as she vanished, leaving behind a very flustered ice elemental, an equally annoyed phoenix shifter, and a market display that couldn't decide if it was experiencing winter or summer. The weather-sensitive charms continued their confused performance, creating a perfect backdrop to their exasperated expressions. Through the wall, Zara could still hear Ayla's resigned sigh. I don't suppose you know how to make a ghost corporeal, just long enough to strangle? If you figure it out, let me know, Riven replied, and Zara had to stifle another laugh. Dead or not, she was having the time of her afterlife. Luce swept into the SCREAM chambers like a winter breeze, her silvery gown whispering against the polished marble floor. The enchanted candles floating overhead cast dancing shadows that seemed to bow in her presence. She suppressed a smile, as several council members shifted uncomfortably in their high-backed chairs, their movements almost comically synchronized. Madame Thornshade, Elder Blackbriar's greeting carried a hint of wariness. We weren't expecting you today. Oh? Luce positioned herself near a towering window, deliberately standing rather than taking one of the empty seats. I would think the current crisis warrants all interested parties' attention. She adjusted one of her crystal pins, sending prismatic light dancing across the chamber walls. The council members exchanged glances, a few rubbing their temples as her fey glamour settled over the room like a gossamer web. Honestly, they made it almost too easy. Modern supernaturals, had grown so susceptible to the old magics. "We were just discussing the latest echo manifestation near Searing Hollow," Counselor Frost announced, shuffling through a stack of parchments. The elderly vampire's hands trembled slightly, whether from Luce's presence or general anxiety, she couldn't tell. Either worked in her favor. "Ah yes, another containment failure." Luce kept her tone light, though she noticed Sebastian's empty chair with distinct satisfaction. "How many does that make this month?" "7, someone muttered. 8, another corrected. Luce traced a finger along the edge of the council table, her nail clicking against the ancient wood. "And yet we persist with the same ineffective methods." She paused for effect, watching the light from her hairpins create hypnotic patterns that drew every eye. One might question whether these traditional approaches are actually making things worse. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Elder Blackbriar's voice had an edge to it now. Luce withdrew a carefully prepared crystal from her sleeve, holding it up to catch the candlelight. Within its depths, altered images swirled, each showing previous containment attempts followed by increasingly violent echo reactions. "My own research suggests our current methods may be amplifying the disturbances. See how the resonance patterns intensify after each intervention?" The crystal passed from hand to hand, her subtle enchantments ensuring each viewer saw exactly what she wanted them to see. The council chamber erupted into worried murmurs. "But the traditional wards have always," Counselor Frost began. "Have always worked?" Luce arched an eyebrow. "Like they worked in Searing Hollow? Or perhaps you meant Phantom Falls? The evidence speaks for itself." She gestured to the crystal, now causing quite a stir among the younger council members. "This is Sebastian's jurisdiction," Elder Blackbriar interjected, though his conviction seemed to waver. "Is it?" Luce let her voice carry just the right note of concern. "I wasn't aware the echoes respected jurisdictional boundaries. Particularly not with that fascinating new tether situation." She watched several council members straighten at the mention of Riven and Ayla's connection. "The tether is being monitored," Counselor Moonshadow insisted, though she wouldn't meet Luce's eyes. "Of course it is." Luce's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just as the resonant heart was being monitored before it shattered. Tell me, how is that investigation proceeding?" The chamber erupted into arguments. Jurisdictional disputes, budget concerns, and accusations flew across the table like badly aimed spelling bolts. Luce watched it all unfold, occasionally dropping a carefully worded observation that sent the debate spiraling in new, chaotic directions. "Perhaps," she suggested during a brief lull, her voice carrying an almost musical quality, "we should consider forming a special committee. One with broader authority to implement more effective solutions. The current structure has served us for centuries," Elder Blackbriar protested, but others were already nodding. "And look where that's gotten us," Counselor Frost responded, gesturing at the crystal still making its rounds. "Maybe Madame Thornshade has a point." Luce kept her expression neutral, though triumph surged through her veins like liquid starlight. They were playing directly into her hands, and not one of them seemed to notice the subtle pulse of her crystal hair pins growing stronger with each passing moment, each whispered suggestion. "I merely want what's best for Evergloam," she said softly, her words carrying to every corner of the chamber. "Don't we all?" The council dissolved into another round of heated debate, and Luce allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Sebastian's empty chair seemed to mock them all, and she wondered idly how he'd react when he discovered just how thoroughly she'd undermined his authority in a single afternoon. Luce watched with carefully concealed amusement as Counselor Reed, barely a decade into his position, cleared his throat nervously. The young werewolf's earnest expression reminded her of a puppy, trying to join the big dog's table. "Perhaps," he ventured, "we should consider working directly with the tethered pair? Their unique connection." "Oh, my dear Counselor Reed." Luce let concern drip from her voice like honey laced with poison. "Your optimism is admirable, but surely you recall the Crimson Veil incident?" She paused, noting how the other council members leaned forward, their eyes glazing slightly as her glamour intensified. Another unique partnership that ended with 3 city blocks reduced to ash and ice. I don't remember, Reed frowned. Before your time, of course. Luce waved her hand dismissively, her rings catching the light. The motion sent sparkles dancing across the chamber walls, drawing attention away from Reed's confusion. The archives have quite detailed accounts of similar volatile combinations. Elemental partnerships are particularly explosive. The chamber's protective wards flickered as she moved, her gown trailing wisps of silvery magic that curled around ankles and wrists like affectionate cats. Each step released more of her carefully crafted glamour into the air. Speaking of volatile situations, Elder Blackbriar's voice cut through the haze, there are questions about certain magical signatures near recent echo manifestations. How fascinating. Luce turned sharply, her hairpins chiming like tiny bells. Those same signatures appeared in Counselor Moonshadow's district, did they not? She watched satisfaction bloom as Moonshadow straightened, defensive anger replacing the glazed look in her eyes. What exactly are you implying? Moonshadow demanded. Merely that we should examine all possibilities. Luce's smile was razor sharp. Though I find it curious how quickly you jumped to accusations. The chamber crackled with tension as council members exchanged suspicious glances. Luce could almost taste the mistrust spreading through the room like frost across a window. Her glamour caught the negative energy, amplifying it, feeding it back in subtle waves that made everyone shift uncomfortably in their seats. We should vote on immediate intervention measures, Elder Blackbriar announced, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. Poor man, he hadn't noticed how thoroughly she'd already undermined his authority. An excellent suggestion. Luce positioned herself near the voting crystal, where her presence would be most effective. Shall we review the proposals? One by one, council members presented their solutions. Luce waited until Councillor Frost suggested increasing traditional containment wards, exactly the approach she knew would fail spectacularly, before making her move. Traditional methods do have a certain comfort to them, she mused, letting her glamour pulse subtly stronger. In times of crisis, we often seek the familiar. She watched several heads nod in agreement, their eyes slightly unfocused. When the votes were cast, Luce suppressed a smile as the crystal glowed with exactly the results she'd orchestrated. The council had chosen the most restrictive, least effective measures possible, guaranteed to make the echo situation worse while appearing to take action. Well, that's settled then. Elder Blackbriar looked relieved to be concluding the session. Council members filed out, many still casting suspicious glances at their colleagues. Luce lingered, admiring her reflection in one of the chamber's tall windows. In the darkening glass, her violet eyes seemed to glow with an inner fire. The crystal pins in her hair caught the last rays of sunlight, sending rainbow fractals across her satisfied smile. She waited until the last echoing footsteps faded, before approaching the chamber's central ward stone. Her fingers danced over its surface as she whispered words in the ancient Phi tongue, her magic seeping into the protection matrix like water into sand. The wards would now conveniently fail to detect the next wave of echo activity, just another small thread in her carefully woven web of chaos. Such a productive afternoon, she murmured to the empty chamber, her voice carrying just a hint of midnight frost. The magical candles dimmed in her wake as she glided toward the exit, leaving only shadows and whispered doubts behind. Chapter 3: A Goblin's Gambit. Grimble's prized collection of oddities swayed precariously as he scrambled atop his favorite stepstool, the one with exactly 3 wobbles, perfect for dramatic presentations. The moment he spotted the approaching figures through the market crowd, his ears perked up like radar dishes catching prime gossip. Ah! My favorite temperature-challenged couple. He waved enthusiastically, accidentally nudging a tower of enchanted snow globes. The topmost globe teetered, and he caught it with the tip of his nose, sneezing as glitter showered his face. Meant to do that. All part of the showmanship. The ice elemental, cool as a midwinter morning, and the phoenix shifter, radiating enough heat to toast marshmallows, approached his booth with matching expressions of determination. Grimble's merchant instincts tingled deliciously. We're not a couple, Ayla stated, frost crystallizing on a nearby wind chime. Yet? Grimble chirped, then coughed. I mean, what brings such distinguished customers to my humble establishment? He straightened his vest, jingling the collection of temporarily borrowed trinkets pinned there. Ayla reached for a crystalline artifact shaped like a teardrop. We're searching for something to help stabilize the... Don't touch that. Grimble yelped as Riven stepped closer, heat waves already rippling the air. It's very sensitive to, well, everything you two are doing right now. Too late. Frost bloomed across his merchandise, immediately followed by rapid melting. Grimble dove for his emergency collection of handkerchiefs, each one borrowed from a different market vendor during particularly engaging haggling sessions. Oh dear, oh dear. He dabbed frantically at the drips. Do you know how hard it is to keep frost-touched sundrops in mint condition? Very hard. The last batch exploded into rainbow snow. Sorry, Riven offered, not sounding sorry at all. Maybe if someone wasn't so quick to freeze everything. Maybe if someone could control their internal furnace, Ayla countered. Aha. Grimble's hand dove into his vest pocket, past 3 lucky marbles, a deflated balloon, and what might have been yesterday's sandwich. This is exactly what you need. He triumphantly produced an orb that pulsed with swirling colors. What is it? Ayla leaned closer, squinting at the runes. The harmonizer. Guaranteed to balance opposing energies. Grimble bounced on his mismatched shoes. Side effects may include minor temporal displacement, spontaneous tap dancing, and occasional bouts of speaking in rhyme, he added in a rushed mumble. The tether between them suddenly pulled, yanking Riven closer to Ayla. Grimble watched in horror as the temperature shift sent his display into chaos. The left side of his booth frosted over, while the right side began smoking ominously. Perfectly normal, Grimble assured them, shoving a smoldering collection of enchanted bookmarks under the counter. All part of the ambiance. Very exclusive atmosphere we're creating here. His ears twitched nervously, as both Ayla and Riven reached for the orb simultaneously. Their fingers brushed, creating a puff of steam that made Grimble's whiskers curl. Maybe I should, Ayla started. I've got it, Riven insisted. Pop. The orb activated, releasing a swirling cloud of what could only be described as frostfire, ice crystals dancing with golden sparks in a mesmerizing spiral. Grimble dove behind his counter, with the speed of someone well-practiced in avoiding magical mishaps. That's supposed to happen? He squeaked, peeking through his fingers. Actually, yes. All part of the demonstration. Very exclusive feature. A spark landed on his vest, setting one of his borrowed trinkets smoking. Though perhaps we should continue this transaction at a slight distance from my remaining inventory. The frostfire swirled higher, catching the market lantern's light and casting otherworldly shadows. A passing shopper oohed appreciatively, probably assuming it was part of Grimble's normal sales pitch. Should it be making that noise? Riven asked as the orb began to hum. What noise? I hear no noise. Just the sound of a quality magical artifact doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Grimble's ears flattened against his head as the humming grew louder. Though perhaps we should discuss the very reasonable price quickly. Before the demonstration reaches its crescendo. A snowflake made of fire drifted past his nose. Grimble sneezed, sending a stack of gently used tarot cards scattering across the counter. I'll even throw in a complimentary reading. The cards say you're both very compatible. And possibly about to duck. The orb's humming reached a pitch that made Grimble's teeth vibrate. This was either going to be his most spectacular sale ever, or his most spectacular disaster. Possibly both. He really should have read the fine print on that artifact dealer's license more carefully. Grimble's paws moved with practiced efficiency, shoving merchandise into his emergency escape satchel, the one with the questionably acquired expansion charm. The moment Ayla's protection runes had started dissolving like sugar in hot tea, he'd known this demonstration was heading straight for his top 10 most spectacular sales disasters. At least it wasn't as bad as the singing salamander incident of last spring. His eyebrows had only just grown back. Your artifact is defective. Ayla's accusation cut through the chaos. Grimble paused his hasty packing to gasp in theatrical offense. Defective? My dear, it's working exactly as intended. Creating harmony through, he watched Ayla's usually pristine hair poof out like dandelion fluff, creative atmospheric adjustments. Riven's deep laugh only made the ice elemental's scowl deepen. Grimble winced as the temperature around his booth plummeted further. The brass buttons on his vest started frosting over, and those were his favorite borrowed buttons. The frostfire cloud swelled like a magical soufflé gone wrong, spreading its peculiar effects across the market. Madame Whisper's fortune-telling tent next door transformed into an impromptu steam room, the heavy perfume inside becoming a tropical fog that had the psychic's crystal ball sweating. On his other side, poor Herbert the potion vendor watched in horror as his entire inventory crystallized, the bottles making musical tinkling sounds as they froze. My love potions. They're not meant to be served on ice, Herbert wailed. Completely normal market fluctuations. Grimble called out, stuffing a collection of enchanted doorknobs into his satchel. Very exclusive weather patterns. Limited time only. He'd almost finished packing when Ayla's voice cut through the pandemonium. We have to contain it together. Grimble's ears perked up despite his better judgment. The ice elemental had raised her hands, frost swirling around her fingers like miniature galaxies. Riven's response was immediate and predictably flamey. Fire erupted around his hands, and the resulting light show above Grimble's now vacant booth would have been quite lovely if it wasn't directly above his remaining merchandise. Perhaps take the magical light show elsewhere? Grimble suggested hopefully, clutching a box of temperamental time-twisted trinkets to his chest. Somewhere less flammable? And less meltable? But the tether binding his customers had other ideas. As they attempted to corral the frostfire, their forced proximity turned the whole thing into some sort of elemental dance competition. Grimble watched in fascination as they stumbled around his abandoned display table, somehow managing to step on each other's feet despite having plenty of room. Your left, no your other left. Ayla's frustration was evident as Riven spun the wrong way, nearly singeing her sleeve. I know my lefts. Riven protested, dodging an icicle that materialized inches from his nose. Clearly not. She yanked against the tether's pull. Who taught you directional magic, a drunken compass? Grimble took advantage of their distraction to snag a few more valuable items from the chaos. That enchanted mirror had been quite expensive to acquire. And those self-shuffling playing cards were irreplaceable. Well, technically replaceable, but the card shark he'd won them from was still looking for him. The frostfire finally began to condense, swirling tighter and tighter until it collapsed in on itself with a sound like winter bells in a thunderstorm. In its place stood the most exquisite ice sculpture Grimble had ever seen, a perfect fusion of frost and flame captured in frozen form. For approximately 3 seconds, Riven's residual heat turned the masterpiece into modern art, then into a puddle with impressive speed. Grimble, who had taken strategic cover behind Herbert's frozen potion cart, clutched his money pouch close. No refunds, he declared, then added quickly, all sales are final. Especially sales involving potentially unstable artifacts of mysterious origin. Steam rose from the puddle surrounding his former customers. Ayla's hair had achieved a level of chaos that defied several laws of physics, while Riven's jacket looked like it had been attacked by a geometric frost spirit with artistic aspirations. Well, Riven's grin was far too pleased for someone standing in a pool of melted magic. At least we know we can work together. Ayla's eye roll was so pronounced that Grimble worried she might strain something. He took that as his cue to make a strategic retreat. Lovely doing business with you, he called over his shoulder, already plotting which section of the market would be safest for his relocated booth. Do come again. Perhaps with less opposing elemental energy next time. Or more. I'm not picky. Though my insurance provider might be. He scurried away, his mismatched shoes squeaking slightly on the damp cobblestones. Behind him he heard Herbert's mournful voice. Do you think frozen love potions count as a new product line? Grimble patted his money pouch, mentally calculating how long he should wait before returning to assess the damage to his regular booth space. The harmonizer had technically worked, just perhaps with more pizzazz than strictly necessary. Though really, in his line of work, there was no such thing as too much pizzazz. It was practically a marketing strategy. His ears twitched as he caught Ayla's exasperated voice fading behind him. This is coming out of your share of the payment. My share? Riven's reply was indignant. You're the one who touched it first. Grimble picked up his pace. He had a feeling the market's weather was about to become very interesting again. Rowan burst through the canal's surface with all the dramatic flair of a theater performer taking center stage, water cascading off his sun-bleached hair in perfect droplets. The sight that greeted him was better than any tavern entertainment. Riven and Ayla stood surrounded by a swirling mix of steam and frost, like nature's own comedy show. Well, well. If it isn't Evergloam's favorite walking weather anomaly. He planted his hands on the walkway and executed a graceful flip, landing with just enough splash to make Riven's jacket sizzle. You two are really putting the Phantom in Phantom Falls market today. The look Ayla shot him could have frozen the entire canal, but Rowan had spent too many winters swimming with Arctic seals to be bothered by a little frost. I heard about the market incident. Very impressive, first pair to ever create their own climate zone. The vendors are already taking bets on whether you'll melt or freeze the place first. Tidewell, Riven growled, a warning spark dancing in his amber eyes. If you're just here to? Me? Just here to help. Rowan produced the Vilebreaker quill with the flourish of a master magician, then quickly yanked it back when Riven reached for it. This is a delicate instrument, not a matchstick. Maybe let your less combustible half handle it? The quill seemed to have its own opinions about the situation. As Rowan held it between them, the phoenix feather began to glow near Riven, while delicate frost patterns crystallized along the tip closest to Ayla. Would you look at that? It's like a magical mood ring for your relationship status. Though I'm not sure what steamy frost means in fortune-telling terms. Ayla stepped forward, her analytical gaze fixed on the quill. The resonance patterns are fascinating. The dual nature could help us decode the what now? Rowan circled them, unable to resist humming an old sailor's tune about star-crossed lovers and stormy seas. He flicked a few water droplets in Riven's direction, grinning as they turned to steam before making contact. You know, most people just hold hands. You two had to go full elemental crisis. The tether between them, visible now as a shimmer in the air, pulled them closer as they both reached for the quill. Rowan leapt back with theatrical alarm, as their proximity created a fresh burst of mist. Watch the hair. Some of us work hard on our roguish charm. If you're quite finished with the commentary, Ayla said, frost rimming her words, we need to examine the quill's properties before. Before what? Before you two create another weather system. Rowan perched on a nearby railing, his silver ring catching moonlight as he gestured. Because I've got to tell you, as someone who specializes in water-based transport, having random patches of instant weather changes is really messing with my delivery routes. Had to dodge 3 miniature storm clouds this morning. The quill pulsed between them, its glow intensifying as their elements clashed. Rowan watched with undisguised fascination as Riven's natural heat caused the frost patterns to melt and reform in endless cycles. It was like watching a dance, if the dancers were trying very hard not to admit they were dancing. Just think, he mused, somewhere out there some prophecy writer is very proud of themselves for this setup. Let's bind fire and ice together. What could possibly go wrong? He affected a scholarly tone that made even Ayla's lips twitch slightly. Riven shot him a look that would have intimidated anyone who hadn't spent their life swimming with sharks. Don't you have some packages to deliver? Oh, dozens, Rowan agreed cheerfully. But none of them are half as entertaining as watching you two try to pretend this isn't the most interesting thing to happen in Evergloam, since that time someone convinced the Ghost Council that casual Friday was mandatory. Rowan balanced on the canal's edge, enjoying how his casual posture seemed to aggravate Riven more with each passing moment. The Selkie's silver ring caught another moonbeam, and this time the warning pulse in its runes made him pause mid-quip. Right. Actually important information to share, even if the delivery could still be fun. Speaking of places you two shouldn't go but absolutely will, he drawled, the Frostfire ruins have been acting up lately. And not in the usual ancient temple with attitude way. He traced patterns in the water with one foot, watching the currents shift unnaturally. The waterways up there are wrong. Moving against the flow, carrying echoes of old magic. A merchant vessel drifted past, creating the perfect ripples for a little impromptu performance. With a flick of his wrist, Rowan shaped the waves into tiny water figures, a miniature Riven and Ayla facing off across the market square. Picture it, our dashing phoenix hero about to save the day. The water Riven posed dramatically, sparks of real light dancing through the liquid. When our cool-headed ice maiden decides to help. The water Ayla raised her arms, and Rowan added sound effects. Whoosh. Crash. Steam everywhere. Poor Grimble's beard still hasn't recovered. The real Ayla's expression could have frozen hellfire, and with a gesture, she crystallized his entire water puppet show into an ice sculpture. If you're quite finished? Almost never, Rowan grinned, but let his expression settle into something more serious. The ruins are dangerous. Though probably less dangerous than you two near any temperature-sensitive artifacts. Right on cue, Riven shifted his weight, and the heat rolling off him began melting Ayla's frozen tableau. The water figures collapsed in a way that was frankly artistic. Rowan wished he'd planned it. He twirled the Vilebreaker quill between his fingers, its dual nature responding to his touch with neither fire nor frost. Now, pay attention to the Selkie who actually reads instruction manuals. He demonstrated with a flourish, his voice falling into the sing-song rhythm of old sea shanties. Write with fire, reveal with ice, just try not to destroy this priceless magical device. The quill danced across his palm, leaving traces of luminescent script that faded like seafoam. See? Gentle touch. Though I suppose, gentle isn't really in either of your vocabularies when it comes to each other. Riven grabbed the quill with more force than necessary, probably just to be contrary. We can handle it. Like you handled that Frostfire cloud? Rowan couldn't resist. He watched them gather their supplies, already imagining the chaos they'd cause in the ruins. Remember, the ruins are ancient and sacred. He paused for dramatic effect. And probably not fireproof. Riven's annoyed swipe was so predictable that dodging it felt like a choreographed dance move. Rowan backed toward the canal with the performer's practice steps. Try not to steam up the entire ruins. He called, preparing for his exit. Some of us have to make deliveries there later. The splash he created was perfect, just enough water to make Riven's jacket sizzle again, not enough to trigger Ayla's frost reflexes. His laughter echoed off the waterway walls as he slipped beneath the surface, catching their shared look of exasperation before the water embraced him. Under the canal's surface, where they couldn't see his expression, Rowan finally let his smile fade. The ring's warning pulses were getting stronger, and the currents whispered of trouble brewing in the ruins. But sometimes the best way to help was to keep things light, especially with those two. They had enough weight on their shoulders without him adding to it. Besides, he thought as he swam deeper into Evergloam's waterways, someone had to provide commentary on this slow burn disaster of elemental proportions. It was practically a public service. Chapter 4: Guardians and Vulnerabilities. Ayla stood at the glade's edge, letting the moonlight wash over her as mist curled around the ancient stones before her. The familiar tingle of frost magic danced at her fingertips as she began crafting a shield, each ice crystal forming with the precision she'd spent years perfecting. Usually this brought comfort, the methodical creation of something both beautiful and protective. Tonight, though, her hands trembled. "You're doing that thing again," Riven observed from somewhere behind her. "What thing?" The ice patterns grew more intricate, reflecting her irritation at being interrupted. That thing where you get all? He waved his hands vaguely. Extra frosty. I do not get extra frosty. The shield sprouted a few decidedly pointed icicles. Right? And I don't accidentally set things on fire. That was my favorite scarf you incinerated yesterday. It was ugly anyway. Who wears powder blue in? He cut off as the echo pulsed, sending waves of cold energy through the glade that resonated with Ayla's powers. She froze, her usual fluid movements stuttering to a halt. The familiar signature of the echo wrapped around her like an icy embrace, bringing with it memories she'd rather forget. Her shield strengthened reflexively, layers of frost building upon each other in swirling patterns that mirrored her churning thoughts. Ayla? Riven's voice had lost its teasing edge. What is it? I know this echo. The words came out barely above a whisper, her composed mask cracking like thin ice. The frost shield responded to her distress, creating elaborate crystalline structures that caught the moonlight and scattered it in fractured rainbows. She sensed rather than saw Riven step closer, their tether humming with shared tension. A warm hand reached for her shoulder, but stopped short as the edge of her shield began to melt, creating a small waterfall. Sorry? He tried to back away, but the tether yanked them together like stubborn magnets. Steam hissed around them in a perfect circle, making them look like they were standing in the world's most awkward sauna. This stupid tether. It's fine. It wasn't fine. Nothing about this was fine. Ayla tried to maintain her professional distance, to treat this like any other magical disturbance, but her voice betrayed her. The last time I confronted an echo like this, I lost control. Everything froze, including people I cared about. The shield pulsed with each painful word, ice fractals spreading outward like a frozen spiderweb. A tendril of frost crept toward Riven's boots, but melted before it could reach him. That's why you're always so? He gestured at her general existence. So what? The words came out sharper than intended. Controlled? Like you've got every movement planned 3 steps ahead. The echo keened then, a sound that sent shivers down both their spines. For once, Riven didn't fill the silence with another quip. He just watched as Ayla's internal struggle played out in the increasingly complex ice patterns surrounding them. I had a partner before, she found herself saying, the words spilling out like water from a crack in a dam. Another healer. We were containing an echo similar to this one, when the ice shield crackled ominously. She couldn't walk for months after the frostbite healed. But she did heal, Riven pointed out quietly. That's not the point. A spike of ice shot up between them, immediately beginning to melt from his natural heat. I'm supposed to heal people, not hurt them. And now I'm tethered to someone whose very presence destabilizes my magic. Hey, you're not exactly a walk in the park for my powers either, Frostbite. He ran a hand through his hair, which smoked slightly. But maybe that's the point. The echo wailed again, louder this time. Ayla's shield wavered as she turned to face him. What do you mean? Well, you're all? He made a flowing motion with his hands. Control and precision and perfectly arranged everything. And I'm a chaos engine with impulse control issues? I was going to say spontaneous, but sure, wound me with your accuracy. He grinned, and despite everything, Ayla felt the corner of her mouth twitch upward. The point is, maybe we keep melting each other's magic because we're supposed to find a balance. The echo pulsed again, and this time Ayla noticed something different. Where her ice met Riven's ambient heat, the energy seemed to stabilize rather than clash. The steam created perfect spirals instead of chaotic clouds. That's... She tilted her head, studying the pattern. Actually not completely ridiculous. High praise from the Ice Queen herself. He stepped closer, and this time when her shield began to melt, she didn't try to reinforce it. So what do you say? Want to try facing this echo together? I promise to only melt the ice you want me to melt. That would be more reassuring if you had any actual control over it. But she found herself nodding anyway, the weight of her past failures lightening just slightly. Just try not to set anything important on fire this time? No promises. But I'll do my best to keep the chaos to a minimum. That's the least convincing thing you've ever said. The echo surged forward, but this time Ayla stood her ground, letting her shield adapt to the warm presence at her side. Ayla's hands shook harder as the echo's energy pressed against her consciousness, bringing with it memories of shattering ice and desperate screams. The precise lattice of her shield began to crack, frost patterns spiraling out of control. She tried to steady her breathing, to regain that careful composure she'd spent years perfecting, but her usual methods slipped away like melting snow. Warmth bloomed at her back as Riven edged closer, their tether humming with shared tension. Steam rose where his natural heat met her frost, creating delicate swirls in the air between them. "Hey Ice Queen, you're not alone this time." The gentle words, so unlike his usual teasing, made something crack inside her. The shield collapsed completely, dissolving into a shower of snowflakes that vaporized instantly in Riven's presence. Ayla's arms dropped to her sides, trembling. "I'm not used to letting my defenses down," she whispered, hating how vulnerable her voice sounded. The admission cost her more than she cared to admit. "I noticed." His tone held no judgment, just a warmth that had nothing to do with his phoenix nature. "You've got more walls than a fortress," says the man who sets things on fire when he's nervous. "That was one time. Okay, maybe 3 times. This week." He stepped closer and something strange happened. Where their energies met, ice crystals formed and melted in continuous patterns, creating an almost musical chime. The echo's wail softened, responding to their combined presence. Ayla watched, fascinated despite herself, as frost patterns danced across the ground only to melt and reform in new configurations. The usual sharp edges of her ice took on flowing, organic shapes she'd never achieved before. "Sometimes losing control isn't the worst thing," Riven said softly. A small flame appeared in his palm, wild and untamed. "Look." The fire flickered erratically, dancing up his arm before he guided it back, condensing it into a perfect sphere. "It's part of who we are. The chaos, the precision, both matter." She studied the interplay of their powers, how the steam created abstract patterns in the moonlight. Her next frost pattern emerged less rigid, more flowing, allowing for Riven's heat rather than fighting it. Where they met, neither element dominated. Instead, they created something entirely new, a balanced harmony she'd never thought possible. "I spent so long convinced that perfect control was the only way to keep people safe," she admitted, watching ice crystals form and dissolve in rhythmic waves. "After what happened with Zara?" "The healer you mentioned?" Ayla nodded, throat tight. "She trusted me and I lost control. The ice, it spread so fast." Fresh frost crackled across the ground, but this time Riven's warmth tempered it, keeping it from spreading too far. "I promised myself I'd never let that happen again. And instead, you locked everything away behind those perfect ice walls of yours." His hand found hers, impossibly warm against her cool skin. Steam rose between their palms, but neither pulled away. "How's that working out for you?" A surprised laugh escaped her. "Terribly, apparently, since I'm stuck with a walking furnace who melts everything I try to create. Maybe that's not such a bad thing." He squeezed her hand gently. "Ready to face this echo?" Together this time, no perfect shields required. The echo pulsed again, but its resonance felt different now. The glade filled with a gentle mist, neither too hot nor too cold, as their energies found an equilibrium. Ayla took a deep breath, letting her usual rigid control soften just slightly. "I still think you're going to set something important on fire," she muttered, but there was no real bite to the words. "Probably. But you'll be there to cool things down." His grin was infectious. "That's kind of our thing now, isn't it? Fire and ice, chaos and control? If you start singing opposites attract, I'm freezing your hair." "Wouldn't dream of it, Ice Queen." But his eyes danced with mischief as they turned to face the echo together, their combined powers creating patterns neither could achieve alone. The mist swirled around them, carrying echoes of the past, but this time Ayla didn't try to wall them off completely. Instead, she let the memories flow like water, tempered by Riven's warmth and the strange new balance they'd found between precision and chaos. Through crystalline eyes that had witnessed centuries pass like snowflakes in the wind, Alira observed the approaching duo with barely concealed amusement. The Phoenix Shifter's footsteps left smoldering prints in her pristine halls, while the Ice Elemental's presence added layers to her carefully maintained frost. Such opposing forces, yet the tether between them pulsed with an unmistakable rhythm. Alira gathered her essence, materializing before them in a swirl of diamond dust and winter wind. Ah, fire and ice come seeking wisdom. Her voice carried the chime of icicles in the breeze, each word leaving delicate patterns of frost in its wake. The Phoenix, Riven, startled, his warmth flaring defensively. How predictable. Guardian Frostveil. The Ice Elemental, Ayla, inclined her head with proper respect. At least one of them understood protocol. We need access to the inner chamber, Riven blurted, earning him a sharp look from his companion. His impatience radiated like a furnace, already melting the delicate frost sculptures Alira had spent decades perfecting. Indeed. Alira glided around them, her crystalline gown creating a symphony of tinkling sounds. Yet wisdom like ice formed slowly, layer upon layer. She paused, studying how they unconsciously shifted closer together despite their obvious differences. To proceed, solve this riddle. What burns but never melts, freezes but never shatters, binds but never breaks? The Phoenix's brow furrowed. Is this really necessary? The echoes are growing stronger. Patience Flameheart. Elira's form flickered like snow and moonlight. Some answers reveal themselves only to those who wait. Ayla stepped forward, frost spreading beneath her feet. We should at least attempt the crossing. Without waiting for a response, she began crafting an ice bridge across the chasm before them. Her technique was flawless, each crystal perfectly aligned, each layer reinforced with practiced precision. Then Riven followed. Alira couldn't suppress her ethereal chuckle, as his mere proximity caused Ayla's careful work to deteriorate. The Ice Elemental shot him an exasperated look. Could you possibly radiate a little less heat? Sorry, it's not exactly something I can turn off. He reached for her arm as one section began to crack. Maybe if you made it thicker. Maybe if you stayed back. Children, Alira interrupted, drifting between them. Perhaps the traditional approach isn't the answer. She gestured to the ancient runes adorning the walls, which had begun responding to their presence. Near Riven, they glowed with inner fire. Near Ayla, they collected sheets of delicate frost. The ruins remember when fire and ice danced in harmony, before the great sundering. Harmony? Riven scoffed, though Alira noted how his eyes lingered on Ayla. Have you seen what happens when we try to work together? It's like trying to juggle water and lightning. An apt comparison. Elira's form shimmered with amusement. Yet what transforms destruction into creation? She watched understanding dawn in Ayla's eyes first. The tether, Ayla whispered, unconsciously touching her chest where the magical bond pulsed. It's not about maintaining separate powers, is it? The heart knows what the mind resists, Alira agreed, her voice carrying centuries of wisdom. Riven and Ayla exchanged glances, a wordless communication passing between them. Then, slowly, deliberately, they moved in sync. Ayla's ice met Riven's fire not in opposition but in dance. Steam rose where their powers merged, condensing and crystallizing into something entirely new, a bridge of steam-hardened frost, stronger than either element alone. Well done. Elira's approval resonated through the chamber, setting the ancient crystals singing. Though I suspect the real challenge lies not in crossing chasms, but in bridging the gaps within. The tether between them flared brilliantly, and Alira noticed how they both pretended not to notice their synchronized intake of breath. Mortals could be so charmingly obtuse about the obvious. Now then, she continued, gliding toward the sealed doorway ahead. Shall we discuss why the resonant heart truly brought you together? She paused, adding with a touch of mischief, beyond the obvious of course. Riven's temperature spiked noticeably. The obvious? She's teasing us, Ayla muttered, though a fine layer of frost had begun collecting on her cheeks, her equivalent of a blush. An ice wraith? Teasing? Alira allowed her form to become slightly more translucent, the ethereal equivalent of a wink. Perish the thought. We are creatures of utmost seriousness and solemnity. A nearby ice sculpture chose that moment to crack from Riven's residual heat, the timing so perfect it almost seemed intentional. Chapter 5: Frozen Chaos. Ayla's fingers traced delicate patterns in the air, weaving frost magic into protective barriers along the ancient stone walls of the Frostfire ruins. The crystalline structures sparkled with embedded runes, each one carefully calculated to contain the volatile echoes lurking in the shadows. Perfect, precise, and completely ruined the moment Riven took 3 steps closer. Sorry? He winced as another section of her handiwork turned to slush. Maybe if I... Don't move, Ayla cut him off, watching a rivulet of melted ice trickle down the corridor. She'd spent 20 minutes on that particular configuration of frost shields. 20 minutes, gone in seconds because her fire-powered partner couldn't seem to keep his natural heat in check. The tether between them hummed, an invisible cord drawing them inexorably closer despite her protests. Ayla planted her feet firmly, determined to maintain enough distance to actually accomplish something useful. You know, Riven mused, sliding slightly on the wet floor, we could probably market this as an indoor skating rink. Make a fortune. We're trying to contain dangerous magical echoes, not start a recreational facility. But Ayla couldn't quite suppress the twitch of her lips. His ability to find humor in their predicament was oddly warming. Which was exactly the problem. She started another containment field, her movements precise as she layered protective runes into the crystalline structure. Just as the final sigil began to take shape, the tether gave a sharp tug. Riven stumbled forward, his shoulder brushing hers, and the entire thing dissolved into steam. If you could just, she began, exasperated. Stay exactly where you are? He finished with that infuriating grin. The tether might have other ideas about that. Before she could retort, a pulse of volatile energy swept through the corridor. The echo materialized, a swirling vortex of unstable magic that set the air crackling with power. Acting on instinct, Ayla threw up a frost shield just as Riven summoned a wall of protective flames. Their barriers collided, merging into a dome of opposing elements that sparked and hissed. Well, that's new, Riven commented, watching flames dance across the icy surface. And highly unstable, Ayla added, though she couldn't help being fascinated by the interplay of fire and frost. We need to stabilize this section before the echo tears through. She began crafting a complex ice pattern, weaving protective runes into an intricate lattice. Riven leaned in close, studying her work with genuine interest. Immediately, droplets began falling from the ceiling. Their eyes met in shared exasperation. Maybe if I just... He reached toward the melting pattern. Don't? But the tether chose that moment to pull them together, sending Ayla stumbling into his chest just as she released a surge of frost magic. She expected it to evaporate instantly against his natural heat. Instead, something extraordinary happened. Where her ice met his fire, it didn't melt. The elements merged, creating swirling patterns of flame suspended within crystalline frost. The design spiraled outward, beautiful and impossible, fire and ice in perfect harmony. Are you seeing this? Riven breathed, his amber eyes wide with wonder. Ayla nodded, transfixed by the dancing lights within the frozen surface. The opposing energies, they're stabilizing each other somehow. Frostfire, he dubbed it immediately, earning an amused look from her. What? It needs a name. Focus, she chided but couldn't hide her smile. Let's see if we can replicate it. It took several attempts, punctuated by puddles and steam clouds, before they found the right balance. Ayla learned to anticipate the heat of his magic, weaving her frost patterns just so, while Riven carefully modulated his fire to complement rather than overwhelm her ice. When they finally succeeded in creating a stable barrier of frostfire, the satisfaction on Riven's face matched her own. The magical fusion cast shifting patterns of light across his features, softening his usual intensity into something almost gentle. "We make a pretty good team," he said softly, "when we're not accidentally sabotaging each other." The key word being accidentally, Ayla replied, but there was no bite in her tone. She was too pleased with their discovery to maintain her usual cool distance. The echo swirled against their newly created barrier, testing its strength. But where their separate elements had failed, this fusion held firm. Fire and frost worked in tandem, neither overwhelming the other, creating something stronger than either could achieve alone. Much like the partners who'd created it, Ayla realized with a start. Though she'd never admit that particular observation out loud. The echo surged through the corridor like a tidal wave of unstable magic, forcing Ayla to grab Riven's arm for balance. Her fingers tingled where they met his skin, but instead of the usual hiss of steam, there was only a gentle sizzle. She'd unconsciously adjusted her temperature just as he'd moderated his, a small victory that shouldn't have pleased her quite so much. "You're left," she called out as another echo approached, its ethereal form writhing with volatile energy. Without hesitation, Riven responded, his flames arcing gracefully around her ice barrier instead of melting through it. Their powers wove together in an intricate dance, frost and fire moving in perfect counterpoint. The sight captivated her, the way his flames respected the boundaries of her ice, how her frost crystals seemed to catch and amplify the light of his fire rather than extinguishing it. It was nothing like the careful, controlled magic she'd spent years perfecting. This was wild and beautiful and somehow exactly right. "There's another one coming," Riven warned, his voice tight with concentration. "That section looks tricky." Ayla assessed the narrow passage ahead, noting the way the echo's energy patterns shifted and swirled. "We'll need precise timing." "On my count?" He nodded, positioning himself slightly behind her right shoulder, close enough for their magic to merge, far enough to prevent accidental melting. The tether hummed with approval. 3. She began weaving her frost pattern. 2. His flames flickered to life, waiting. 1. Their powers surged forward together, meeting in a spectacular fusion of crystalline flames. The echo crashed against their barrier, but couldn't break through. Within the frostfire, tiny sparks danced like imprisoned stars, each one perfectly suspended in translucent ice. Ayla allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. "That was amazing," Riven suggested, and she could hear the grin in his voice without turning to look. "Adequate," she corrected primly, but her heart wasn't in the criticism. They both knew how unprecedented this was. As they ventured deeper into the ruins, the ancient walls began to tell a story. Beneath centuries of frost, elaborate murals depicted scenes of elemental magic, specifically, the harmonious interaction of fire and ice. Ayla stepped closer, her scholarly interest piqued. "Look at these markings," she murmured, brushing away some of the frost with gentle fingers. "They're showing techniques similar to what we just discovered." Riven moved closer, and for once his natural heat proved useful, helping to illuminate the frost-covered images without damaging them. "So we're not the first to figure this out? That's almost disappointing." "On the contrary," Ayla traced the flowing lines of an ancient rune, "this proves we're on the right path." The ancients understood something about elemental balance that's been lost to time. They continued until the passage opened into a vast circular chamber. The moment they entered, Ayla felt it, a profound sense of magical resonance that made the tether between them sing. This space had been designed for exactly what they were attempting. Without discussion, they found their positions, instinctively seeking the perfect balance point. Close enough for their magic to mingle, far enough to maintain control. The tether settled into a contented hum, neither pulling nor pushing. "Ready?" Riven asked, flames already dancing around his fingers. Ayla nodded, calling forth her frost magic. This time, their powers merged effortlessly, creating a sustained barrier of frostfire that encompassed the entire chamber. The light it cast painted everything in shimmers of blue and gold, transforming the ancient stone into something otherworldly. "We make a decent team," Riven admitted, studying their handiwork with obvious pride. "When you're not melting everything in sight," Ayla added, but the words held more affection than annoyance. She couldn't quite explain when that shift had happened, when his destructive effect on her magic had become more endearing than infuriating. The Frostfire barrier pulsed gently, strong and stable. Looking at it, Ayla had to acknowledge that perhaps there was something to be said for imperfect solutions. For magic that wasn't precisely controlled, but naturally balanced. For partnerships that shouldn't work but somehow did. She felt Riven's gaze on her and kept her eyes firmly fixed on their creation, unwilling to examine too closely the warmth spreading through her chest. It was professional satisfaction, she told herself. Nothing more than pride in a difficult task well executed. The tether hummed knowingly, as if it wasn't fooled for a second. Through a shimmering veil of ancient magic, Luce glided into the hidden chamber like mist seeping through cracks in reality. The weathered wards protecting the space rippled and bent around her, recognizing and yielding to her Phi essence. A smile curved her lips as she took in the swirling echo energy that filled the chamber like ghostly smoke. Well, well. What delicious chaos we have brewing. Her violet eyes caught the dancing light of the echoes, reflecting their unstable energy. With deliberate grace, she lifted her hands to her elaborately braided hair and began removing the crystal pins that held it in place. One by one, the pins clinked against the stone floor as she arranged them in a precise constellation. Each crystalline point pulsed with the corrupted magic she'd infused them with over months of careful preparation. The natural flow of echo energy in the chamber began to stutter and twist, responding to her dark enchantments. A touch here. She adjusted one pin with her toe, its facets gleaming. And there, another slight shift, and the entire pattern thrummed with discordant power. Her silver hair now cascaded freely down her back, moving in an unfelt breeze generated by the building magical tension. The temperature in the chamber went haywire. One moment frost crystallized on the ancient walls, the next, waves of heat made the air shimmer. Luce began to sing, her voice carrying the seductive undertones of Phi magic that made mortals dance themselves to death in fairy rings. The echoes responded, writhing and condensing into shapes that defied natural law. Poor Sebastian, she mused, reaching into the folds of her flowing gown. Always so concerned with balance and control. But chaos? She withdrew the stolen fragments of the resonant heart, their once pure light now tainted with smoky shadows. Chaos is so much more entertaining. The fragments chimed against each other as she held them up, their natural harmony corrupted into a jangling discord that set teeth on edge. Shadows leapt and twisted across the chamber walls like living things, dancing to the fragments' broken song. "Let's make things interesting for our elemental lovers," Luce murmured, her elegant hands weaving complex patterns in the air. The echoes responded eagerly, coiling around her fingers like eager serpents before lashing out to strike the chamber's protective runes. Hair-thin cracks appeared in the ancient markings, spreading like frost across glass. From another hidden pocket, she produced a set of corrupted keystones. Each one thrummed with power that made the air taste like metal and midnight. With precise movements, she placed them at cardinal points around the chamber, ensuring the ancient defenses would fail at exactly the right moment, when it would cause maximum disruption to those meddlesome elementals. The crystalline walls of the chamber caught and multiplied her reflection, showing her from every angle as she worked. Each version wore the same calculating smile, violet eyes gleaming with satisfaction as her plans took shape. "Fire and frost," she said, running a finger along one of the cracking runes. "Such volatile elements. Add a dash of chaos." The rune sparked and sputtered under her touch. And watch the sparks fly. The chamber's energy shifted again, responding to her manipulations. The echoes grew stronger, their ethereal forms taking on more substance as they fed on the corrupted power she'd introduced. The temperature swings became more violent, and the very air seemed to pulse with building pressure. Luce paused to admire her handiwork, watching as the carefully placed pins pulsed in sequence, each one sending ripples of disruption through the natural flow of magic. The fragments of the resonant heart sang their broken song, encouraging the echoes to grow wilder, more unpredictable. Sebastian always did underestimate the power of a little disorder, she said to her multiplied reflections. Such a shame he won't be here to see his precious balance crumble. She adjusted her gown, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from the enchanted fabric. But then again, the best chaos always needs time to properly ferment. Luce watched with growing satisfaction as the echoes responded to her carefully laid enchantments. The crystalline pins pulsed in a hypnotic rhythm, drawing the chaotic energy into intricate patterns that spider-webbed across the chamber. Each intersection in the web sparked with volatile magic, creating a lattice of pure instability that would feed on itself, growing stronger with every passing moment. "Dance for me, little echoes," she crooned, her phi magic lending her voice a seductive resonance that made the very air shiver. The ethereal forms twisted and writhed, taking on shapes that seemed to defy reality itself, one moment sharp as broken glass, the next fluid as mercury. They responded to her will like eager puppets, their wild energy contained but ready to explode at her command. The temperature fluctuations grew more extreme as she wove her spell. Frost crackled across the ancient stones only to melt instantly, creating sheets of ice that steamed in the waves of heat that followed. Perfect, she thought, watching droplets of water dance and evaporate before they could hit the ground. Let them try to maintain control in this chaos. Her violet eyes caught the light of the corrupted resonant heart fragments, their once pure glow now tainted with swirling shadows. The pieces chimed discordantly as she arranged them, each note setting her teeth on edge in the most delicious way. Power thrummed through her fingers as she positioned them precisely, creating a resonance that would amplify the chamber's instability. "Fire and ice may work together," she mused aloud, her voice carrying both amusement and malice as she adjusted one of the fragments a fraction of an inch. "But chaos?" She laughed softly. "Chaos consumes all." The chamber's transformation continued under her expert guidance. Ancient runes flickered and failed, their protective magic corrupted by her carefully placed keystones. The very walls seemed to pulse now, like a living thing struggling to contain the power building within. Pressure built in the air, thick and heavy as storm clouds ready to burst. With delicate precision, Luce withdrew a single crystal from her gown. Unlike her other tools, this one appeared perfectly innocent, clear as mountain spring water and cool to the touch. But appearances, as she well knew, could be delightfully deceiving. The crystal's facets caught and reflected the swirling chaos around it, making it seem to glow from within. She placed it on the central altar, with the care of a jeweler setting a priceless stone. "Such a small thing," she murmured, positioning it just so. But then the deadliest poisons often come in the smallest vials. The crystal settled into place with a soft click that seemed to resonate through the entire chamber. The trap was perfect, a masterwork of magical engineering that would turn her opponent's greatest strengths into weapons against them. Every burst of Riven's fire, every wave of Ayla's frost would only feed the chaos she'd created. Their attempts to work together would only hasten their undoing. Luce stepped back, drinking in her handiwork with the appreciation of a true artist. The chamber had become a symphony of controlled chaos, every element precisely calibrated to create maximum disruption. The echoes swirled around her in patterns that would have driven a lesser being mad, but she found their dance beautiful in its destruction. "One final touch," she whispered, raising her hands in an elegant gesture. Phi magic sparkled at her fingertips as she wove the concealment spell, erasing all traces of her presence from the chamber. The magic settled over her work like a gossamer veil, invisible but impenetrable. Sometimes, she addressed the turbulent echoes, her voice rich with satisfaction, "the greatest victories come from letting others destroy themselves." The chaos responded to her words, the echoes twisting into shapes that almost looked like they were bowing to her. With a graceful turn that set her silver hair flowing like liquid moonlight, Luce prepared to take her leave. The magic gathered around her, ready to whisk her away from her carefully crafted trap. A smile curved her lips as she imagined the scene that would unfold when those two elemental fools stumbled into her web. "Let the game begin," she breathed, and vanished in a swirl of phi magic, leaving behind only the sound of distant discordant chimes and the promise of destruction to come. Chapter 6: The Shard of Balance. Riven's heart thundered against his ribs as he approached the trial area, each step sending ripples of heat through the already sweltering hollow. The ancient stone walls pulsed with an orange glow that matched the fire churning beneath his skin. His powers were definitely not helping the whole, maintain a stable environment plan. And there goes another one, Ayla sighed, as her latest set of frost runes melted into shimmering puddles at their feet. Her silver hair caught the amber light, making her look like she was wreathed in flames herself. I don't suppose you could dial back the walking furnace act? Sorry. Riven ran a hand through his hair, wincing as tiny flames danced between his fingers. It's this place. Everything's so resonant. The word felt right, even as more of Ayla's careful icework dissolved around them. Resonant, yes. Stable, decidedly not. Ayla's cool voice carried a hint of humor as she sketched another set of runes into the air. These lasted approximately 3 seconds before joining their predecessors in the growing network of puddles. Though I'm beginning to think you enjoy watching my work melt. What can I say? I'm a fan of water features. The joke slipped out before he could stop it, earning him an eye roll that somehow managed to be both exasperated and amused. A familiar crackling announced Corwin's arrival, the echo's spectral form shimmering into existence like heat waves over desert sand. The trial of balance approaches, he intoned, then paused to watch Ayla's newest frost barrier evaporate under another surge of Riven's power. Though perhaps some preliminary practice is in order. You think? Ayla muttered, already crafting replacement runes. I'd settle for 5 minutes without accidentally creating a sauna. Riven stepped toward the pedestal where the shard of balance rested, its red and blue surface catching the light like a frozen flame. His powers surged in response, sending a wave of heat rolling through the chamber. Behind him, he heard the distinctive sound of ice sublimating directly into steam. A little warning next time? Ayla's voice was slightly muffled, probably from behind whatever remained of her hasty shield. Some of us prefer not to be flash-fried. Right? Sorry. Again? Riven focused on the ancient conduits carved into the stone, channels that would need to carry his fire without melting everything in sight. I'll just give this a try. He reached for his power, trying to thread it carefully through the first conduit. The resulting surge was less careful thread and more raging inferno. Stone glowed white-hot, and Ayla's latest protective measures vanished in a burst of steam. Okay, that was not ideal. He glanced back at Ayla, finding her looking skyward as if asking for patience. Maybe a little less power next time? You think? She stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the cool air that naturally surrounded her, fighting against his heat. We need to stabilize this before you melt the entire chamber. Try not to cook us both. The tether between them hummed at their proximity, and Riven had to force himself to focus on the task, rather than the way her presence seemed to both calm and electrify him at the same time. I'll do my best, but no promises. He watched as she began weaving an intricate frost pattern around his hands, her own fingers dancing through the air with practiced precision. Though your track record for keeping ice solid around me isn't exactly stellar. Maybe if someone wasn't constantly channeling their inner volcano. She worked quickly, frost spiraling in complex patterns that lasted progressively longer before melting. There. Now try again, but this time imagine you're lighting a candle, not starting a bonfire. Riven nodded, taking a deep breath. The heat under his skin pulsed in time with his heartbeat, eager to be released. Right? Candle, not bonfire. I can do that. Corwin's echo drifted closer, his spectral flames casting no heat. The key lies not in restraint alone, but in harmony. Fire and ice, passion and precision, they must dance, not duel. Easy for you to say, Riven muttered, watching as another of Ayla's frost patterns began to drip. You're not the one melting everything in sight. Riven watched in amazement as his flames, for once, didn't immediately destroy Ayla's handiwork. Instead, his fire traced the crystalline paths she'd created, dancing through channels of ice that somehow held firm. The resulting display painted the chamber in shifting patterns of orange and blue light, steam rising in elegant spirals where the elements met. This is different, he managed, trying to focus on maintaining the delicate balance rather than the way Ayla's eyes reflected the ethereal light show they'd created. Your fire's not fighting the ice anymore, she observed, her hands moving in fluid motions to extend the network of frost channels. It's like they're complementing each other. He felt it too. The usual burning need to release his power had transformed into something more controlled, more purposeful. His flames followed her lead willingly, creating beauty instead of destruction. Guess we just needed to stop trying to overpower each other. The shard of balance pulsed stronger now, its dual-colored surface seeming to respond to their synchronized energies. Riven felt his phoenix nature stirring, demanding to be fully unleashed. His hands began to glow, flames licking between his fingers. Riven. Ayla's voice cut through his rising panic. Her cool fingers wrapped around his burning ones, creating an immediate hiss of steam. He waited for her to pull away from the heat, but she held firm. Let it come. I've got you. The contact should have been painful for both of them, but somehow it wasn't. Her frost magic flowed through their joined hands, not fighting his fire but working with it, creating a circuit of balanced energy. For the first time since discovering his powers, Riven felt truly in control as he embraced his phoenix nature. Now, Corwin's echo instructed. The shard is ready. Moving in perfect sync, they approached the pedestal. Riven reached out with his free hand, while Ayla maintained a steady flow of cooling energy through their linked fingers. The shard rose from its cradle, suspended in a dance of fire and frost. Just as his fingers brushed the crystal's surface, a surge of raw power exploded through them both. Riven felt Ayla stumble and reacted instinctively, spinning to catch her before she could fall. His arms wrapped around her waist, and he realized with surprise that his usual overwhelming heat had somehow settled into a warm glow that didn't seem to bother her at all. They stayed frozen like that, surrounded by swirling steam and the afterglow of their combined magic. Ayla's silver hair brushed his chest, and he became acutely aware of how perfectly she fit against him, ice and fire finding an impossible balance. We did it, he said softly, still holding her steady. The words felt inadequate for what had just happened, for this moment where opposing forces had become something entirely new. Indeed. Corwin's echo flickered at the edge of their vision. Perhaps opposing forces aren't so opposed after all. With those words, his spectral form faded into the steam-filled air, leaving them alone with the weight of that observation. Riven felt Ayla slowly straighten in his arms, though neither of them immediately stepped back. He noticed a flush coloring her usually pale cheeks, and felt an answering warmth that had nothing to do with his powers rise in his own face. The air between them felt charged with more than just residual magic, full of unspoken possibilities that neither of them seemed quite ready to address. The shard pulsed in his hand, reminding them of their purpose here. Right. The mission. They had a job to do, regardless of whatever this new development between them meant. But as they finally moved apart, Riven couldn't help noticing that the usual clash of their temperatures had transformed into something more like harmony, and he wasn't just thinking about their magic. Zara couldn't help but grin as she materialized through the ancient oak, timing her entrance perfectly to startle Riven. The phoenix shifter yelped, a delightfully undignified sound, and a burst of flame escaped his fingers, singeing the delicate frost patterns Ayla had spent the last 10 minutes crafting. Ah, look at you two. Still causing meteorological mayhem wherever you go. Zara twirled dramatically, her vintage polka dot dress swishing through the evening air. Being dead had its perks, her entrance game was always on point. Ayla's eye twitched as she watched her careful work dissolve into steam. I just finished that. You'll make another one, Riven muttered, trying to recover his dignity. You always do. And you'll melt it again, Zara chimed in cheerfully, floating between them in lazy circles. It's like your own special love language. Instead of flowers and chocolates, you've got steam and puddles. She drifted through Riven's personal space, making him shiver. Ooh, toasty. Then she zipped through Ayla, her spectral form rippling. No wait, freezing. You guys should really pick a temperature and stick with it. This hot and cold routine is giving me goosebumps. Ayla turned her attention back to the ancient stones, her fingers trailing over the worn symbols with scholarly focus. Or at least, she tried to focus. Zara kept popping up in front of her, making increasingly ridiculous, spooky faces. You know what they say about all work and no play, making ice elementals extra frosty. Zara wiggled her translucent eyebrows. The map, Riven prompted, though Zara noticed how his lips twitched, betraying his amusement. She pretended to warm her spectral hands near him, making exaggerated sighs of contentment. Oh right, the map. The map to the chamber. The secret map. The map chosen specifically to find the chamber. She paused for dramatic effect, enjoying how Ayla's composed expression cracked just slightly with exasperation. Zara, Ayla said in that perfectly measured tone that meant she was trying very hard not to smile, please focus. I am focused. I'm focused on how adorably frustrated you get when I'm not focused. But Zara finally produced the ethereal scroll she'd been carrying, watching it shimmer between visibility and transparency. Now this is very straightforward. You just need to follow the path that's not there to find the door that doesn't exist. That's literally the opposite of straightforward, Riven pointed out. Zara ignored him, floating through various stones while narrating with theatrical flair. Turn left at the suspicious shadow, right at the ominous whisper, and straight on till morning, or until you hit the wall of doom. Either way. The wall of doom? Ayla's frost patterns spiraled across the ground in an unconscious display of concern. Every proper ancient ruin needs a wall of doom, Zara insisted. It's in the manual. What manual? The Ancient Ruins Decoration Guide, obviously. Chapter 3, Essential Elements for Proper Doom and Gloom. She passed through another stone, then poked her head back out. Though I have to say, you two are really bringing down the doom and gloom atmosphere, with all your sparking romantic tension. It's like watching a rom-com in a crypt. Riven's temperature spiked enough that Zara felt it even in her spectral form. A nearby patch of Ayla's frost melted instantly. See? That's exactly what I mean. Zara clapped her ghostly hands in delight. The spirits of these ancient ruins are probably so confused. They're trying to maintain their spooky reputation, and here you are, turning it into Love Actually, Supernatural Edition. Can we please focus on the map? Ayla's voice had that slight crack that meant she was fighting back either laughter or frustration. With Ayla, it was sometimes hard to tell the difference. Fine, fine. Zara floated upside down, pointing at the ethereal scroll. But I'm just saying, if you two wanted to kiss dramatically in front of the wall of doom, it would really liven up the place. Metaphorically speaking, of course, since everything here has been dead for centuries. She winked. Present company included. The temperature around them swung wildly, as Riven and Ayla pointedly looked anywhere but at each other. Zara grinned. Dead or not, she still knew how to liven up a quest. Being dead had its perks. Like watching Ayla meticulously create delicate ice markers along the ancient stones, only to have them melt seconds later when Riven moved too close. The resulting steam made lovely swirling patterns in the air, almost as artistic as the frost designs they'd replaced. It's like a really inefficient breadcrumb trail. I called out, doing lazy loop-de-loops above their heads. Or should I say water trail? Though I suppose that's technically what all trails become around you two. Ayla's jaw tightened in that way that meant she was counting to 10 in her head. She created another marker, this one shaped like an intricate snowflake. It lasted approximately 3 seconds before Riven gestured animatedly while reading the map, sending a wave of heat in its direction. Sorry, he muttered, not looking particularly sorry at all. I drifted through a nearby oak tree, enjoying the ticklish sensation of passing through solid matter. Oh, and watch out for the guardian spirits. They're almost as cranky as Ayla before her morning iced tea. No offense. A frostbolt zinged through my midsection. The sensation was rather like getting hit with a snowball. If snowballs could pass harmlessly through you while giving you a slight case of the shivers. I pretended to clutch my non-existent pearls in shock. I'll have you know that was very rude. And here I am, selflessly helping you navigate these treacherous ruins. Something flickered at the edge of my spectral awareness, a lingering trace of magic that made my form waver involuntarily. The playful mood evaporated as I recognized the signature. "Luce has been here," I said, my voice dropping its usual theatrical flair. "She's laid traps." The magical residue felt oily, leaving an unpleasant sensation even to my ghostly senses. But I couldn't maintain seriousness for long. It went against my entire afterlife aesthetic. But hey, at least you two can't get any more magically tethered than you already are. Riven and Ayla exchanged one of those looks that made me want to start humming wedding music. Instead, I launched into an elaborate demonstration of the proper approach to the heart chamber. It involved several pirouettes, a bit of ghostly moonwalking, and what I considered to be a very artistic interpretation of Dodge the Ancient Curse. "The heart chamber," I announced, finishing with a flourish that sent my spectral dress swirling, "is like your relationship, complicated, volatile, and likely to explode." "That's not reassuring," Ayla said dryly, creating another ice marker that lasted precisely as long as it took Riven to scratch his neck thoughtfully. "It wasn't meant to be." I twirled between them, enjoying how they both shivered as I passed through. "I'm going for dramatic foreshadowing here. It's very in right now among the deceased community." As they gathered their supplies, as they gathered Ayla's supplies, since Riven seemed to operate on a rush-in and hope for the best philosophy, I couldn't resist offering a few final pieces of wisdom. "Remember, if you see a suspicious glowing anything, don't touch it." I fixed Riven with my best ghostly glare. "I'm looking at you, mister. What does this mysterious lever do? And try not to turn the sacred chamber into a sauna." "That was one time," Riven protested. "3 times, Ayla corrected, not looking up from her bag of supplies. "The incident at Moonbeam Apothecary doesn't count. That was clearly Juliet's fault." I began to fade away, letting my form grow increasingly transparent. It was one of my favorite exit techniques, much more stylish than simply popping out of existence. If all else fails, just follow the trail of melted ice and scorched stones. You two are literally the most trackable people in Evergloam. My laughter lingered in the glade long after my form had disappeared completely. I stuck around invisibly just long enough to watch Riven accidentally melt one final ice marker, followed by Ayla's exasperated sigh and the slight quirk of her lips that suggested she wasn't nearly as annoyed as she pretended to be. Being dead definitely had its entertainment value. Chapter 7: Convergence at the Tavern. Riven pushed open the heavy oak door of the Emberleaf Tavern, immediately sensing the shift in atmosphere as Ayla followed him inside. The temperature around them went haywire, his natural heat colliding with her icy presence. Along the bar, a row of Brask's signature blazing frost cocktails began to bubble and fizz erratically, their carefully balanced hot and cold layers turning into miniature weather systems. "Well, if it isn't our walking weather front," Brask drawled, his ember-cracked skin pulsing with barely contained amusement. The fire elemental's molten hair shifted like slow-moving lava as he watched his prized drinks throwing tiny sparks. "Sorry about that." Riven ran a hand through his flame-touched hair, feeling the heat rise under his skin. Not that he was actually sorry. Watching Ayla's frost patterns dance across the wooden surfaces of the tavern stirred something warm in his chest that had nothing to do with his phoenix nature. "Incoming." Zara's gleeful voice preceded her spectral form as she phased straight through the bar, causing Rhett to jump and splash his drink down his front. For crying out, the werewolf courier dabbed at his shirt with a napkin. "Some of us still have physical forms to worry about, you know. Where's the fun in that?" Zara's form flickered with mischief as she hovered near their group, pointing at the steam rising between Riven and Ayla. "Look at these two, turning my favorite tavern into a sauna." Riven opened his mouth to retort, but movement on the bar caught his attention. Brask's salamander Ember scuttled across the counter toward him, drawn by his heat. The little creature made it halfway, before hitting the pocket of cold air around Ayla and doing a comical about-face. "Can't even keep a salamander neutral," Rowan called from his corner table, his silky ring catching the tavern's warm light. That's got to be some kind of record. Riven shot him a glare that could have melted steel, matched perfectly by Ayla's equally frosty look. The synchronized response only made Rowan's grin wider. "If you're done critiquing our elemental compatibility," Riven said, dropping into a chair at the largest table, "we've got actual problems to discuss." The wood beneath his hands started to smoke slightly, until Brask wordlessly slid a heat-resistant coaster under his arms. Ayla settled across from him, and immediately delicate frost patterns spread across her side of the table. The contrast would have been beautiful if it wasn't so damned frustrating. Every time he shifted closer to make a point, their competing temperatures created a fresh burst of steam. "Right, the heart chamber," Rhett leaned forward, his amber eyes gleaming with excitement. "We go in fast and direct. Because that worked so well last time." Rowan cut him off with an exaggerated eye roll, making explosion noises while waving his hands. Boom! Crash! "Oh no, who could have seen this coming?" "That about sum it up?" "You got a better idea, fish boy?" Rhett's words had bite, but his grin showed he was enjoying the banter. Riven felt the heat building under his skin as the argument continued. He'd never been good at sitting still during strategy sessions, and having Ayla so close, yet maintaining that careful distance, wasn't helping his concentration. Every few seconds, their elements would brush against each other, creating little pockets of chaos in the air between them. Brask appeared at their table with another round of drinks, his movements deliberate and measured. "The heart seeks what the mind denies," he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. His knowing look swept between Riven and Ayla, who Riven suddenly realized had been unconsciously leaning toward each other despite the steam this created. Riven pulled back slightly, ignoring the way his powers seemed to reach for Ayla's cold presence like a moth to flame. Or in this case, he thought with grudging amusement, like a phoenix to an ice storm. "Care to be a little more cryptic there, Brask?" Riven asked, wrapping his hands around his drink. "Maybe throw in something about destiny and fate while you're at it?" The fire elemental's skin crackled with silent laughter. "Some things don't need explaining, kid. They just need accepting." He gestured to where Riven's heat and Ayla's frost were creating a perfect spiral of steam above their drinks. "Nature has a way of finding balance, whether we like it or not." Riven tried to focus on the map spread across the tavern table, but Zara's spectral form kept diving through it, making exaggerated whooshing noises. Her latest pass scattered his thoughts like autumn leaves. "You know what this plan needs?" She materialized upside down, her vintage dress defying ghostly gravity. "More explosions. Or maybe just more unresolved tension." Her eyebrows waggled meaningfully between him and Ayla. Heat rushed to his face, definitely from annoyance, he told himself, and the tavern's magical hearth roared in response, sending shadows dancing across the walls. Beside him, Ayla's concentration manifested in delicate frost patterns that crept across the nearby windows, creating an odd kaleidoscope effect with the firelight. On the bar counter, Brask's salamander watched the display with unblinking fascination, its tail twitching in time with each temperature shift. "The heart chamber will be heavily warded," Ayla explained, her fingers weaving intricate patterns in the air. Ice crystallized into miniature models of the chamber's defenses, which lasted approximately 3 seconds before Riven's proximity reduced them to puddles. He winced, but before he could apologize, Brask silently placed a set of fireproof figurines on the table. The tavern keeper's molten hair flowed with barely contained amusement. "Thanks," Riven muttered, purposely not looking at Ayla. The figurines were helpful, but they lacked the elegant detail of her ice sculptures. Everything about her work was precise, controlled, the exact opposite of his tendency to burn first and ask questions later. Rhett pushed back from the table, clearly done with the theoretical discussion. "Look, the approach is simple." He shifted partially into wolf form to demonstrate, forgetting about his new center of gravity. 3 chairs went flying as his tail knocked them over. "Oops. Simple. Right?" Rowan's voice dripped sarcasm as he gathered water from his drink into the air. "Or we could try something with actual subtlety." The water formed a perfect miniature of the chamber entrance, complete with tiny guard positions. Ooh, a water show! Zara drifted through the display, scattering droplets everywhere. But where's the dramatic flair? The romance? The inevitable moment when these two finally... Zara? Riven and Ayla spoke in unison, their combined elements creating a burst of steam that made Brask's salamander skitter for cover. The ghost clutched her pearly necklace in mock offense. I was going to say, work together effectively, but your reaction is so much more interesting. Rhett, still partially shifted, let out a sound suspiciously close to a snicker. She's got a point. Your elements seem pretty eager to combine, even if you two are being stubborn about it. I'm not being stubborn, Riven protested, at the exact moment Ayla said, I'm perfectly reasonable about this. Their powers flared again, creating another cloud of steam. Children, please, Rowan drawled, attempting to salvage his water demonstration. Can we focus on the actual mission? But the planning session had devolved beyond salvation. Rhett and Rowan fell into an increasingly animated debate about stealth versus speed, punctuated by Zara's theatrical predictions of doom. And then, just as all hope seems lost, our star-crossed elements will. That's enough, Zara, Brask interrupted, appearing with a fresh round of drinks. His timing was impeccable as always, the glasses clicking against the table like a conductor's baton calling for order. Riven hadn't noticed how close he'd shifted to Ayla during the chaos, until Brask's knowing look made him self-conscious. Their shoulders were barely an inch apart, steam rising steadily between them. He started to lean away, but Brask's voice stopped him. Sometimes the path of most resistance leads to the greatest harmony. The fire elemental's eyes flickered between them, then pointedly down to where their elements were creating that perfect spiral of steam again, like a dance neither of them had consciously chosen to join. Riven stayed where he was, hyper-aware of Ayla's cool presence beside him. Maybe there was something to be said for not fighting the natural order of things, even if that order involved a lot of accidental melting. Ayla smoothed her hands over the tavern table's weathered surface, letting frost crystallize beneath her palms. The chill spread outward, creating a pristine canvas of ice that reflected the tavern's warm lighting. With practiced precision, she began crafting a detailed map of Evergloam's ley lines, each frozen ridge and valley telling its own story of magical currents. If we coordinate our timing, the words caught in her throat as Riven leaned in, close enough that his warmth sent little ripples through her carefully constructed frostwork. A section near his hand began to drip, creating a small puddle that threatened her meticulously placed markers. Sorry, he said, flashing that infuriating grin that made her stomach do unreasonable things. His fingers traced dangerously close to a crucial intersection point. Just trying to get a better look at your strategic brilliance. Behind them, Zara floated dramatically across the room, one spectral hand pressed to her forehead in an exaggerated swoon. Oh, the tension. The strategy. The completely professional map reading. Ayla cleared her throat, refusing to acknowledge the ghost's theatrical performance. As I was saying, if we follow these energy confluences, she traced a delicate frost pattern, only to watch it blur as Riven's finger pointed to another location. What about this route? His touch left steamy prints in her icework, the heat of his skin creating swirling patterns that admittedly had their own strange beauty. Not that she was noticing such things. At all. Rowan and Rhett exchanged looks that were far too knowing for her comfort. The Selkie's eyes danced with barely contained mirth, while the werewolf's grin grew wider with each melted marker. The northern approach seems more stable, Ayla insisted, recreating the frost path Riven had just demolished. Her magic responded instantly, but so did his presence, the ice forming and melting in an endless dance that was definitely not metaphorical for anything else. Perhaps, Brask's voice crackled through the tension like a warm hearth on a winter's night, a demonstration of your combined abilities would be more illuminating. He moved glasses aside with practiced efficiency, clearing a space in the center of their gathering. Show us how you plan to harmonize your powers. The tether between them hummed to life as they stood, pulling them into perfect alignment like magnets finding their poles. Ayla felt the familiar spark of awareness, the way her magic reached for his even as she tried to maintain control. "We'll start simple," she said, summoning a delicate lattice of ice crystals. "Just a basic containment pattern." Riven's fire responded to her frost, not fighting it but somehow enhancing it, creating patterns she'd never seen before. Frost flowers bloomed and melted in endless cycles, each more intricate than the last. The display was beautiful, yes, but completely unlike the controlled demonstration she'd intended. "And here we see two powerful mages," Zara announced to their audience, adopting the tone of a nature documentary narrator, totally not flirting through their magic. "Notice how their powers dance together, much like their owners wish they were." "That's quite enough," Ayla cut in, but her concentration slipped, sending a cascade of snowflakes spinning toward the ceiling. They caught Riven's ambient heat and turned to steam, creating miniature clouds that drifted through Zara's incorporeal form. The tavern's magical hearth pulsed in response to their combined energy, sending waves of amber and azure light rippling across the walls. Brask's salamander took one look at the impromptu light show and dove under the nearest coaster, its tail curling around the edge like a tiny scaly bookmark. Rhett let out a wolf whistle that echoed through the tavern. "Now that's what I call chemistry." Without missing a beat, Ayla flicked her wrist, sending a precise burst of frost that covered his snout in delicate rhyme. The werewolf's surprised yelp dissolved into laughter, shared by everyone except Ayla, who was absolutely not blushing at the implications. "If we could return to the actual strategy," she said, trying to recover some semblance of professional dignity. But Riven's warmth was still there, still melting through her careful walls, both magical and emotional. And maybe, just maybe, she was starting to mind a little less than she should. Ayla took a steadying breath, trying to ignore how the tether between her and Riven seemed to hum with increased intensity in the tavern's close quarters. "Focus," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else, and pressed her palms against the wooden surface once more. The ice crystals that formed beneath her touch weren't quite as sharp as usual, their edges softening into gentle curves that reminded her entirely too much of the way Riven's smile had started affecting her. "The echo patterns suggest 3 primary convergence points," she explained, creating delicate frost markers across her impromptu map. She could feel Riven's warmth at her shoulder, distractingly close as he leaned in to study her work. A few markers nearest to him began to blur, their precise edges melting into tiny pools that somehow managed to look artistic rather than ruined. "Here." Rowan stepped forward, his hands moving in a fluid gesture that drew moisture from the air. Water coalesced into a shimmering representation of Evergloam's magical currents, floating above Ayla's frost map. "If we overlay the tidal patterns with your ice formations." The water diagram suddenly vaporized into a cloud of steam as Riven shifted closer, his natural heat turning Rowan's careful work into a miniature weather system. "You know," Rowan drawled, watching the steam dissipate, "most people just admit they like each other without causing magical climate change. Less property damage that way." Ayla felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with Riven's proximity. "The strategic value of combining our observations." "Is absolutely what I meant," Rowan interrupted, winking at Rhett, who wasn't even trying to hide his amusement. "Actually," Riven said, either oblivious to or choosing to ignore the subtext, "if we follow Ayla's original pattern but add a spiral approach here," he traced a path through her frost work, and for once instead of simply melting it, his finger left behind a trail of crystalline patterns touched with amber warmth. The effect was surprisingly beautiful. Ayla found herself nodding, impressed despite herself. That would create a more stable containment field. And if we time the elemental resonance. She added a series of delicate frost circles that complemented his spiral, their magics interacting in ways that made her theoretical diagrams almost dance across the table's surface. Behind the bar, Brask moved with quiet purpose, his ember-like skin glowing as he prepared a round of his signature cocktails. The blazing frost drinks were notoriously difficult to balance, the outer layer of blue fire typically consuming the frozen core within seconds. But as he set them on the table, positioning one precisely between Riven and Ayla, something unusual happened. The drink maintained its perfect equilibrium, fire and ice swirling in an endless dance that mirrored their own magic's interaction. Brask's knowing look made Ayla want to hide behind her hair, but she forced herself to maintain her professional composure. The eastern approach through Mirrorfall Glade offers the best cover, she continued, creating a new series of frost patterns. And my fire can provide a distraction here, Riven added, his finger brushing against her ice work. This time, instead of melting it completely, his heat merely refined the edges, turning sharp angles into flowing curves that better match the natural energy flows. The tavern's hearth pulsed with warm amber light that mixed with the cool radiance of Ayla's frost illustrations, casting the room in a gentle interplay of warmth and chill. She found herself relaxing into the collaborative atmosphere, as Rhett suggested optimal timing based on lunar phases, and Rowan detailed the best water routes for backup escape plans. One final overlay, Ayla said, standing to create a comprehensive diagram that would tie all their strategies together. The floor seemed to shift slightly beneath her, perhaps she'd been concentrating too hard, but before she could stumble, Riven's hand was at her elbow steadying her. The contact sent a jolt through the tether that manifested in her magic, turning what should have been precisely geometric frost patterns into something more organic and flowing. Rather than fighting it, she let the change happen, watching as Riven's ambient heat transformed her usual rigid ice crystals into something new. Frost flowers bloomed across the diagram, their petals caught in an eternal moment between ice and thaw, creating an effect that was both practical and breathtaking. Ah! Zara's coo echoed through the tavern, somehow managing to sound both genuinely touched and deeply amused. Look at your magic-making art together. That's just... Don't, Rhett groaned, but he was grinning. So beautiful, Zara continued, undeterred. Almost as beautiful as... The strategic implications, Ayla cut in quickly, though she couldn't quite keep the smile from her voice. The pattern clearly shows. Oh yes, very strategic, Rowan agreed with exaggerated seriousness. Absolutely nothing romantic about the way your powers are literally dancing together right now. Ayla opened her mouth to protest, but found herself distracted by the way Riven's hand was still at her elbow, his touch somehow both grounding and unsettling. Their combined magic continued to create patterns across the table's surface, each design more intricate than the last, and she couldn't quite bring herself to stop it. Chapter 8, Heart of the Cavern. Ayla's boots crunched on frost-rimmed stone as she entered the heart chamber, the temperature fluctuating wildly between her natural chill and Riven's radiating heat. Steam curled through the ancient air, creating an ethereal fog that danced around them. Near the corrupted heart fragments, Luce stood like a queen holding court, her violet eyes gleaming with fie malice as she tracked their approach. How predictably punctual, Luce drawled, her crystal-pinned hair catching the unstable light from the heart shards. Instinct and training took over as Ayla quickly wove a defensive ice barrier, the crystalline structure rising in intricate patterns. But Riven stepped closer, too close, and she felt the telltale surge of heat just as Luce unleashed her first attack. The barrier dissolved into useless slush, forcing them to dive in opposite directions as corrupted energy crackled through the space they'd occupied. The tether between them snapped taut, throwing off their landing and sending Ayla stumbling into a frost-covered pillar. Having trouble maintaining boundaries? Luce's mockery echoed through the chamber as her crystal pins pulsed with dark energy. The air grew thick with distorted echoes, each one carrying memories Ayla had fought to suppress. Her first patient lost to unstable magic, the disappointment in her mentor's eyes, the whispered doubts about her ability to control her powers. Beside her, she sensed Riven tense as his own demons were dragged into the light. A rush of heat warned her seconds before Riven launched his counterattack. Phoenix fire blazed through the chamber, magnificent and wild, and completely obliterated the ice runes she'd just finished positioning. A little warning next time, she called out, already adapting her frost patterns. Instead of fighting against his flames, she let her ice flow with them, creating channels that guided rather than blocked. The combination sent prismatic light dancing across the walls. Fire and ice, Luce's voice seemed to come from everywhere, as phantom versions of her materialized around them. Forever destroying each other. How poetic. Each duplicate fixed them with that same violet stare, targeting vulnerabilities with surgical precision. Tell me, Ayla, how long before your precious control shatters completely? And Riven, we both know what happens when a phoenix loses control. The tether pulled sharply, and Ayla found herself forced back toward Riven as another wave of corrupted energy carved through the space between them. She braced for the usual clash of temperatures, the inevitable melting of her defenses, but something had changed. As their shoulders brushed, Riven's fire didn't surge destructively against her frost. Instead, it tempered itself, becoming a protective warmth that worked with her magic rather than against it. Instinctively, she adjusted her own power in response, her frost weaving through his flames in delicate lattices that stabilized both their energies. Steam still rose where they touched, but now it formed purposeful patterns, carrying their combined power through the chamber. Impossible, Luce hissed, though Ayla caught the flicker of uncertainty in her expression. The phantom duplicates converged, but Ayla held her ground. For the first time since their powers had connected, she didn't fear Riven's heat destroying her careful work. His presence at her back felt right, their magics finding a harmony she'd never thought possible. Her ice didn't shatter under his fire, his flames didn't falter against her frost. Instead, they danced together, creating something entirely new. Ready? Riven's voice was low, meant only for her ears. Ayla felt a smile tugging at her lips as she gathered her power, feeling it resonate with his. Try to keep up. Their combined magic surged forward, frost-wreathed flames cutting through Luce's phantoms like they were nothing more than morning mist. The Phi's crystal pins flared with desperate energy as she summoned more corrupted power, but Ayla could sense the shift in momentum. The heart fragments pulsed in response to their harmonized energy, their chaotic light steadying ever so slightly. For the first time since this began, Ayla felt truly, completely in control, not through rigid barriers and careful distance, but through connection and trust. And judging by the way Riven's fire sang through her frost, she wasn't the only one who felt it. Impossible, Luce hissed, but Ayla barely registered the Phi's voice over the harmonious hum of magic coursing through her veins. The sensation was unlike anything she'd experienced. Where she expected chaos from their opposing elements, she found synchronicity. Her frost didn't fight against Riven's heat, it embraced it, transformed by it. Luce's crystal pins flared with dark energy, sending corrupted pulses through the heart fragments. The chamber groaned under the assault, ancient stones trembling as echoes of past disasters threatened to overwhelm them. The fragments' unstable light cast writhing shadows across Luce's face, transforming her elegant features into something almost feral. Ayla's hands moved instinctively, frost spiraling outward in complex geometric patterns. Instead of pulling away, she felt Riven step closer, his heat seeping into her ice with deliberate control. The shield crystallized under their combined power, transforming into something stronger than either of them could create alone. Steam curled around the edges, but the structure held firm, refracting corrupted energy away from them in prismatic bursts. Your precious control won't save you, Luce sneered, but Ayla caught the slight tremor in her voice. The heart requires balance, your opposing natures will tear it apart. The ancient runes etched into the chamber walls began to pulse, responding to their harmonized magic. Ayla felt their resonance deep in her bones, a counter-melody to the song of frost and fire flowing between her and Riven. The harder Luce pushed with her corruption, the more the runes brightened, as if awakening from a long slumber. A particularly violent echo ripped through the chamber, carrying with it all the weight of Ayla's past failures. The force of it nearly drove her to her knees, threatening to separate her from Riven. But his presence anchored her, steady and warm against her back. Their tether hummed with shared strength, refusing to break. Trust me? Riven's question brushed against her ear, barely audible over the chaos swirling around them. Ayla felt a smile tug at her lips, despite the gravity of their situation. Against my better judgment, she replied, letting her frost flow freely into his fire. Their powers merged and expanded, forming a protective dome of frostfire that crackled with controlled intensity. Where their elements met, they created something entirely new, neither ice nor flame, but a perfect fusion of both. Luce's expression contorted with fury as she gathered dark energy between her hands. The corruption writhed like living shadows, feeding off the heart fragment's instability. "You're both fools," she snarled, launching her most devastating attack yet. The blast should have shattered Ayla's ice. Should have overwhelmed Riven's flames. Instead, their combined defense held firm, transforming the corrupted energy into a dazzling display of light and steam. Each crystal in their shield caught and reflected the power, creating a kaleidoscope effect that filled the chamber with dancing rainbows. Standing back to back with Riven, Ayla felt none of her usual anxiety about losing control. Steam rose around them in elegant spirals, but their powers remained perfectly balanced. Every move they made complemented the others, as if they'd been training together for years instead of days. The tether between them pulsed with shared purpose, turning their individual strengths into something greater than the sum of its parts. "This isn't possible," Luce snarled, her composure cracking as she watched her carefully laid plans unravel. The crystal pins in her hair vibrated with barely contained power as she gathered herself for one final desperate assault. "You'll destroy everything." But Ayla knew better now. Control wasn't about rigid barriers and careful distance, it was about trust, about finding harmony in unlikely places. As Luce raised her hands for another attack, Ayla felt Riven's silent question through their connection and responded with quiet certainty. Their powers flowed together seamlessly, frost and fire moving as one, ready to face whatever came next. Riven's heart thundered as waves of chaotic energy pulsed through the chamber, each surge making his phoenix fire flare wildly beneath his skin. The corrupted heart fragments spun in dizzying patterns, throwing off sparks that alternated between scorching heat and biting frost. Along the walls his flames danced out of control, melting Ayla's ice crystals only to have them reform in jagged, unpredictable patterns. "This is getting a bit too exciting even for my taste," he quipped, ducking as a shard of ice whizzed past his ear. The chamber felt like it was coming apart at the seams, magic crackling through the air with the intensity of a thunderstorm. "We need perfect balance." Ayla's calm voice cut through the chaos, steady as ever. Before he could crack wise about their track record with combining powers, her cool fingers found his. The instant chill of her touch sent a different kind of shiver down his spine, and steam hissed where their skin met. For once, he didn't pull away or try to modulate his temperature. "You sure about this?" he asked, though he already knew her answer. "Last time we tried joining powers, I turned your ice sculpture garden into a very aesthetic pond." "That was different." A ghost of a smile played at her lips. "We were fighting it then. Fighting each other." She was right. Every time he'd accidentally melted her magic, they'd been trying to maintain separation, to keep their powers distinct. But now? Riven took a deep breath and let his phoenix fire rise, not fighting to contain it as usual. The flame surged through him, racing along his arm toward their joined hands, but instead of melting away her frost, it twined with it. Ayla's ice magic spiraled around his fire in an intricate dance, neither canceling the other out. "Well, would you look at that," he breathed, watching their combined magic stream toward the heart fragments. "All this time we just needed to hold hands. Could have saved ourselves a lot of trouble." "Focus, Riven," Ayla chided, but he caught the warmth in her tone that had nothing to do with his fire. A shriek of rage cut through their moment. "No." Luce lunged forward, violet magic crackling around her hands. "I won't let you ruin everything." But their unified power had created something new, a barrier of frostfire that rippled and shifted, impossible to breach. Luce's magic splashed against it harmlessly. The crystal pins in her elaborate hairdo began to crack, her perfectly maintained appearance finally showing signs of strain. "Seems your plans are melting away," Riven couldn't resist saying. "Or maybe freezing? I'm not sure what the proper metaphor is here." "Both?" Ayla murmured, her free hand already weaving the stabilization spell. Her movements flowed like water now, none of her usual rigid precision. Their tether, that mysterious force that had initially bound them together, glowed with golden light. What had once felt like a chain now hummed with possibility, conducting their combined power like a lightning rod. The chamber itself seemed to respond, coming alive with their magic. Frost patterns bloomed across the walls in mesmerizing fractals, melting and reforming in perfect time with the flames that danced through them. Where fire met ice, rainbow light scattered through the air, turning the whole space into a kaleidoscope of color. "You know," Riven said, watching the spectacular light show their magic was creating, "if the whole echo hunting thing doesn't work out, we could make a fortune in magical entertainment. Dinner and a show, featuring the amazing Frostfire duo." Ayla's responding laugh, a rare genuine sound, nearly made him lose concentration. "Let's stabilize the resonant heart first. Then we can discuss career changes." The heart fragments pulsed brighter, as their combined magic enveloped them, the chaotic energy gradually settling into a steady rhythm. For the first time since this whole adventure began, Riven felt completely in sync with his powers, and with Ayla. No more accidentally melting her carefully crafted ice works, or disrupting her spells. Their magic sang together in perfect harmony, fire and frost creating something entirely new. "Ready?" he asked, squeezing her hand. Ayla nodded, her pale blue eyes meeting his with absolute trust. Together, their power surged forward as one, wrapping around the heart fragments in streams of gold and silver. The chamber filled with pure light, and Riven grinned as he felt their magic begin to reshape the chaos into something beautiful. Riven felt the exact moment everything changed. The chaotic energy that had been fighting them suddenly yielded, responding to their perfectly balanced magic like a wild creature finally trusting its handlers. "It's working," he murmured, watching in awe as the heart fragments began to rise from their scattered positions around the chamber. Each shard gleamed with swirling ribbons of his fire and Ayla's ice, no longer battling but dancing together in mesmerizing patterns. The pieces moved with purpose now, drawn to each other like magnets finding their true north. Where before his flames had threatened to overwhelm everything, now they tempered perfectly with Ayla's frost, creating a sustained harmony he'd never thought possible. Luce's face contorted with fury, as her corruption, that sickly violet energy she'd used to taint the fragments, dissolved into nothing more than purple smoke. "Impossible," she snarled, her perfectly manicured hands clenching into fists. The imbalance was absolute. "Guess you didn't factor in our explosive chemistry," Riven couldn't resist saying, though the quip cost him some focus. The fragments wavered, and he felt Ayla squeeze his hand in warning. The final surge of power needed to complete the heart's restoration pulled at him like a tide, demanding more than he thought he had left to give. Without thinking, he tugged Ayla closer, their foreheads touching as they braced against the magical drain together. He waited for the usual hiss of steam where their skin met, for that instinctive need to pull back from her frost, but it never came. Instead, their temperatures matched perfectly, as if their bodies had finally figured out what their magic already knew. "Don't you dare let go," Ayla whispered, her cool breath fanning across his face. "Wouldn't dream of it, snowflake." The chamber filled with brilliant light, as the heart fragments snapped together in a cascade of golden energy. The force of it nearly knocked them off their feet, but they held steady, anchored by their joined hands and shared purpose. Their combined magic swirled around the reformed heart in a double helix of fire and ice, sealing the cracks and stabilizing its wild power. A string of curse words that would have made even Grimble blush echoed through the chamber, as Luce's carefully maintained glamour shattered. Her silvery hair writhed like snakes, her violet eyes blazing with otherworldly light as she backed toward a previously hidden passage in the wall. "This isn't over," she spat, her voice distorting. "The heart holds secrets you can't begin to understand." "Lovely chat," Riven called after her retreating form. "We should do it again, never." The passage sealed itself behind her, leaving them alone with the gently pulsing heart. Riven knew he should probably move, but his legs felt like jelly, and Ayla was wonderfully solid against him as they both caught their breath. Steam rose around them in elegant spirals, catching the restored heart's light and creating rainbow refractions that danced across the chamber walls. "We make a good team," he said softly, surprising himself with how much he meant it. All those times he'd accidentally melted her spells, all their bickering and frustration, it had led them here to this moment of perfect understanding. Ayla didn't speak, but her free hand moved in a graceful gesture, conjuring a small ice crystal between them. Riven tensed automatically, expecting his proximity to destroy it like all the others. Instead, his warmth transformed the ice into a perfect prism, scattering light in all directions without melting it a bit. Show off, he murmured, but he couldn't keep the wonder out of his voice. The chamber filled with gentle, harmonious light, as the heart completed its stabilization. Pulses of energy rippled outward, probably clearing the lingering chaos throughout Evergloam, but Riven could hardly focus on that. He was too captivated by the way their magic continued to play together, creating ever-changing patterns of frost and flame in the air around them. When they finally drew apart, it wasn't far, just enough to stand side by side, their joined hands still linking them together. The tether between them, once an annoying magical chain neither of them had wanted, now thrummed with warm, steady energy. It felt less like a force binding them together, and more like a celebration of the fact that they'd chosen to stay that way. "Your fire's still ridiculous," Ayla said, but her tone held none of its usual frost. If anything, she sounded fond. "And you're still the most uptight ice mage I've ever met." Riven grinned, watching their combined magic paint the air with impossible colors. "But I'm starting to think that's not such a bad thing." Chapter 9, Fading Echoes. Maria stood at the ruins in trance, her silver hair catching moonlight like scattered starlight. The last echoes of magic rippled through the air, dissipating like morning mist. Her dress shifted from deep midnight blue to a contemplative silver, as she traced the remnants of power with practiced eyes. Even the slightest whisper of magic felt different now, steadier, more balanced. Nash's approach registered as a gentle warmth at her back, his footfalls silent despite his impressive size. She'd grown accustomed to his ability to move with surprising grace, though she'd never admit how much she appreciated it. "Feeling nostalgic?" His voice carried that gentle teasing note that never failed to soften her edges. They actually did it. Maria watched the stabilized magic weave intricate patterns through the air, her storm-gray eyes following the dance of frost and flame. Her dress rippled with threads of proud gold and thoughtful violet. "Though I'm fairly certain Riven melted half the ruins getting there." Nash's shoulder brushed against hers, as he settled beside her, radiating that comfortable warmth she'd come to associate with home. "You mean our favorite walking weather phenomenon?" "I think the betting pool had them either saving Evergloam or accidentally creating a new climate zone." A reluctant smile tugged at her lips. "Brask owes me 20 credits. He was convinced they'd create some sort of permanent steam room." To be fair, Nash's eyes crinkled with amusement. They came close a few times. "Remember when Riven melted Ayla's ice bridge while they were still on it? I've never seen someone look so murderous while covered in snow." Maria traced her fingers along a nearby wall where frost patterns intertwined with fire marks, creating an oddly beautiful tapestry of opposing elements. "Remember when we thought they'd either kill each other or fall in love?" Nash's rich laugh echoed through the ruins. To be fair, they managed both, several times. That incident with the Frostfire cloud at Grimble's stall? I thought Ayla was going to turn him into a phoenix-flavored popsicle. Instead, she just gave him frostbite in very uncomfortable places. Maria's dress flickered with amused teal. "I still maintain he deserved it." "I wasn't sure about guiding them at first," she admitted after a moment, her voice carrying its usual sharp edge but softened with something like affection. "Especially after that disaster with the enchanted sundial." Nash wrapped an arm around her shoulders, careful not to disturb the swirling patterns in her dress. "You saw what everyone else missed. Just like you always do." His warmth seeped through her, steady and grounding. "Though I'm pretty sure you enjoyed watching them stumble through it all." Someone had to provide commentary. Maria leaned into his embrace, allowing herself this moment of contentment. And Zara was too busy taking bets. They walked through the ruins together, passing spots where Riven and Ayla's combined magic had left permanent marks. Beautiful swirls of frost and flame crystallized in the ancient stone. Near what had once been the main chamber, an entire wall sparkled with their final confrontation against loose ice and fire frozen in eternal dance. "It's like they redecorated," Nash mused, running a hand along the transformed stone. "Very temperature inclusive. Please don't encourage them." Maria's dress rippled with fond exasperation. "The last thing we need is them getting creative ideas about interior design." I've seen enough melted furniture to last several lifetimes. Says the woman who helped Ayla create those ice sculptures for the Midwinter Festival. Nash's eyes gleamed with mischief, which, coincidentally, Riven managed to turn into modern art within 5 minutes. That was different. Mireia traced a particularly intricate pattern where frost spiraled around flames without melting. Besides, Ayla's face when he accidentally created steam figures instead? Worth every moment of chaos. Admit it, Nash pulled her closer, you're proud of them. Mireia's dress shifted to a warm rose gold, betraying her feelings before she could voice them. They did adequate work. Eventually. With significant guidance, and only minor property damage. Aha. Nash's knowing smile earned him a sharp elbow to the ribs. And those weren't tears in your eyes when they finally harmonized their powers? That was clearly from all the steam they generated. Really, the humidity levels were completely unreasonable. But Mireia's dress continued to shimmer with warm, proud colors, completely undermining her attempted deflection. Mireia paused at a seemingly unremarkable corner of the ruins, though the residual energy made her skin tingle. This exact spot months ago, her banshee senses had first picked up the intertwined destinies of fire and ice. Her dress rippled with the memory, shifting from its current rose gold to a deep knowing purple. They were so stubborn, she mused, trailing her fingers along the wall where frost patterns still sparkled beneath a layer of soot. Nash's laugh rumbled through the chamber. Says the woman who refused to admit she liked me for months. I admitted nothing of the sort. Mireia arched an eyebrow at him, though her dress betrayed her with flecks of affectionate pink. I merely acknowledged that your presence wasn't entirely insufferable. Ah yes, how could I forget? Nash, your existence is marginally less annoying than a ghost with hiccups. Truly the height of romance. Before she could craft a suitably cutting response, the ruins' magic stirred around them. The air shimmered, and suddenly they were watching ethereal replays of recent events, like memories given form and light. Riven's spectral form charged forward, flames trailing in his wake, while Ayla's ghostly figure crafted an elaborate ice barrier. The barrier lasted approximately 3 seconds before Riven crashed through it, sending steam billowing everywhere. At least we never caused climate change with our courtship, Mireia remarked dryly, watching the steam dissipate. Her dress rippled with amused turquoise. Though I suppose turning the monthly council meeting into an impromptu séance wasn't much better. Hey, that was entirely Zara's fault. I just happened to be conveniently placed when she decided to possess the chairman's toupee. Nash's form blurred slightly as he shifted partially into his wolf aspect, his amber eyes taking on a more pronounced glow. His nose twitched as he scented the air, parsing through the lingering magical signatures. The echoes are completely gone, he confirmed, then added with a wolfish grin, though I think they left enough steam behind to power Evergloam for a year. Grimble's already trying to bottle it, Mireia said, remembering the goblin's excited chattering about authentic frostfire vapor earlier that day. I give it 3 days before he accidentally creates a miniature rainbow factory or turns his booth into a sauna. They made their way toward the heart chamber's entrance, where the most dramatic changes were evident. The once chaotic energy had settled into something peaceful, almost musical in its balance. Mireia's dress responded instantly, shifting into a harmonious blend of colors that mimicked the balanced magic surrounding them. They found their way, she said softly, just like we did. The words carried more weight than she'd intended, but with Nash, she didn't feel the need to guard them. Nash squeezed her hand, his partial shift receding as he drew her closer. He understood what she wasn't saying, how watching Riven and Ayla navigate their opposing natures had reminded her of their own journey. Of learning to trust, to let someone past carefully constructed walls. A gentle ripple of magic washed through the chamber, different from the chaos of the echoes they'd been fighting. This one showed glimpses of possibilities, moments yet to unfold. Where her banshee senses usually picked up traces of tragedy and loss, now she caught whispers of joy, of laughter, of futures bright with promise. A genuine smile spread across her face, her dress shimmering with colors she rarely allowed herself to wear. Well, would you look at that, Nash said, his voice warm with affection. The infamous Maria, actually looking optimistic. Should I alert SCREAM? I'm sure they'd want to document this historic moment. I could still turn you into a ghost, you know. But there was no bite to her words, and her dress continued to sparkle with happy hues. As they prepared to leave the ruins, Nash bumped his shoulder against hers playfully. So what's next for Evergloam's supernatural matchmaker? Maria summoned a small whirlwind that thoroughly ruffled his perfectly styled hair, but she couldn't quite suppress her smile. There's always another story waiting to unfold, she said, leading him toward the exit. The ruins' magic swirled around them one last time, like a farewell dance of frost and flame, before settling into its new, harmonious rhythm. Nash attempted to smooth his wind-tousled hair. Should I be concerned that you're already plotting someone else's romantic crisis? I don't plot, Maria corrected primly, her dress flickering with mischievous silver. I observe, analyze, and occasionally provide sardonic commentary while fate takes its course. Right, and I'm just a slightly oversized puppy who happens to howl at the moon. Donovan's nose twitched at the acrid blend of fire and frost lingering in the Frostfire ruins. His enchanted notepad hummed against his palm, detecting traces of magic that made his journalist's instincts sing. The mismatched cuffs of his brown tweed jacket and navy suit pants caught on ancient stonework as he crept through the shadows, following the distinctive trail of Phi glamour. Now what were you up to here, Thornshade? He muttered, crouching to examine a scattered trail of crystalline fragments. His yellow eyes narrowed as he scooped up one of the delicate pins, its magical signature unmistakably belonging to Luce. The corrupted energy made his werewolf senses bristle. The notepad's pages fluttered, recording magical frequencies as Donovan scribbled, Council Insider's signature found at scene of ancient artifact disturbance. Sources suggest unauthorized access to restricted areas. Oh, this is going to be good. His crooked smirk grew wider as he photographed the evidence. A bacon-flavored chip wrapper crinkled in his pocket as he shifted position, making him pause mid-movement. But the ruins remained silent, except for the whisper of his pen across paper. Following the trail deeper into the chamber, Donovan's keen nose picked up traces of something else beneath the Phi magic, corruption and decay, clinging to the walls like invisible moss. He paused to adjust his perpetually rumpled collar, already mentally composing headlines, Sacred Site Sabotage, Council Corruption Exposed? Sebastian's going to have kittens over this one, he chuckled, imagining the vampire councilman's perfectly composed face cracking with irritation. Another snack wrapper slipped from his pocket as he crouched to examine a series of corrupted runes etched into the floor. The ancient markings had been subtly altered, their protective magic twisted into something darker. The scent of Phi glamour grew stronger as Donovan tracked Luce's retreat path, leading him to a section of wall that shouldn't have existed according to the ruins' official blueprints. His fingers traced the edge of a concealed passage, discovering the slight shimmer of magical concealment. Getting sloppy, Thornshade, he murmured, carefully documenting the hidden entrance. The council's precious oversight looking shadier by the minute. Behind the false wall, Donovan struck gold. A cache of documents lay hidden in a crystalline compartment, letters bearing Luce's flowing script, correspondence with names that made his eyebrows shoot up. Well, looks like our 5 friends been busy. His excitement made him jostle an ancient vase, and he barely caught it before it toppled. Heart pounding, he photographed each document with meticulous care. His hands trembled slightly with the thrill of the scoop as he uncovered connections between Luce and several other influential figures, all discussing the resonant heart in terms that were far from benevolent. A sudden scraping sound echoed through the chamber. Donovan ducked behind a massive column, cursing under his breath as another empty snack wrapper fluttered from his jacket. He pressed himself against the cold stone, holding his breath as footsteps approached. The scent of frost and fire grew stronger. The echo-bound pair must have returned to investigate. Donovan clutched his evidence closer, his mind racing. This story was too big to risk losing now, but getting caught would mean? The footsteps paused, uncomfortably close to his hiding spot. A feminine voice carried clearly through the chamber. Do you smell bacon? Donovan silently cursed his snacking habits, pressing deeper into the shadows. His notepad vibrated against his chest, still eagerly recording every magical trace in the ruins. He'd have to time this perfectly to slip away without being noticed, but the potential headline was worth the risk. Exclusive, Shadow Council exposed, the truth behind the resonant heart crisis. Donovan's nose twitched as he caught another scent beneath the lingering traces of Phi magic, something older, more insidious. Following the trail led him deeper into the ruins, where the magical residue grew thick enough to make his fur stand on end. His notepad hummed continuously now, pages practically vibrating with the intensity of recorded energy signatures. "Well, isn't this interesting?" he muttered, crouching to examine a scatter of crystalline shards near an ornate pedestal. Each fragment pulsed with corrupted council magic, not just Luce's signature, but others he recognized from SCREAM's inner circle. His quick hands photographed everything while his mind raced, connecting dots that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The trail led to a hidden alcove, where magical resonance patterns swirled across the walls in nauseating combinations. Donovan's keen eyes picked out the subtle alterations, careful manipulations of ley line energies that went far beyond simple interference with the resonant heart. "This goes higher than I thought," he whispered, scribbling furiously. The patterns matched classified council documents he'd glimpsed during previous investigations. But these weren't just random acts of sabotage, they formed a methodical blueprint for something much bigger. A half-burned parchment caught his eye, tucked behind a loose stone. His hands shook slightly as he carefully extracted it, wolf eyes widening as he scanned the contents. Phase markers, timestamps, coded references to council members. The heart's destabilization was just the beginning. "They're not going to bury this story," he growled, his canines lengthening slightly as anger rose in his chest. The wolf in him bristled at the corruption, at the betrayal of public trust. He'd exposed plenty of council mishaps before, but this was different. A sudden crackle of energy was his only warning. Donovan leapt back as magical lightning arced from a hidden rune, singeing the tip of his tail. His heart hammered as he pressed against the wall, watching the deadly energy dissipate. "Amateur hour security," he scoffed, though his pulse still raced. The trap's magical signature matched Counselor Duskweaver's style, sloppy and obvious, just like the pompous owl shifter himself. Donovan made a note to dig deeper into that particular connection. As he examined Luce's abandoned workspace, each piece of evidence revealed new layers of manipulation. Carefully planted suggestions in council meetings, strategic accidents that removed obstacles, subtle enchantments woven into official documents. His usual smirk faded as the scope became clear. Multiple council members were compromised, their decisions subtly guided by Luce's invisible hand. "This isn't just about selling papers anymore," he muttered, carefully photographing a series of correspondence that linked 3 senior council members to suspicious financial transactions. The corruption ran deep, threatening the very foundations of supernatural governance in Evergloam. Donovan meticulously packaged his findings, using enchanted evidence bags to preserve the magical signatures. But one crucial document, a ledger bearing both Luce's signature and a council member's personal seal, he tucked into a secret pocket inside his mismatched jacket. "Try to bury this, Sebastian," he muttered, patting the hidden evidence. The vampire councilman had shut down his exposés before, using legal threats and political pressure. But this time Donovan had real proof and insurance. Taking a final look around the chamber, he allowed himself a grim smile. The room still hummed with traces of Luce's power, but beneath it lay the proof of her overconfidence. "You played your game well, Luce," he said to the empty room, adjusting his rumpled collar. "But you forgot about the nosy wolf with the press pass." A few stray bacon-flavored chip crumbs fell from his pocket as he turned to leave, but for once Donovan didn't notice. His mind was already racing ahead, plotting how to present his findings for maximum impact. The council's carefully maintained facade was about to crack, and he'd be there with his notepad when it did. The ruins felt different now, heavy with the weight of secrets unveiled. Donovan moved carefully through the shadows, his wolf senses alert for any pursuit. The evidence in his jacket burned like fire against his chest, truth ready to ignite a blaze that would consume SCREAM's corruption, no matter how high it reached. Chapter 10: Frostfire Forever. Riven savored the gentle hiss of steam rising from his and Ayla's linked hands as they patrolled the moonlit perimeter of the Whispering Woods. The sound had become oddly soothing over the past weeks, like nature's own white noise machine. Who would have thought he'd find comfort in the constant reminder that he was quite literally too hot to handle? "Your palm's extra toasty tonight," Ayla noted, her thumb tracing small circles on his skin that left fascinating swirls of vapor in their wake. Just thinking warm thoughts about. A familiar tingle at the base of his skull cut him off. Echo. Close. His muscles tensed automatically, magic surging beneath his skin. Ayla's frost shield materialized instantly, a crystalline dome that sparkled in the filtered moonlight. Riven concentrated on keeping his power in check, though he couldn't help the slight melting around the edges. Droplets of water traced lazy patterns down the otherwise pristine ice. "I'm counting that as progress," Ayla said, her lips quirking up at the corners. "Remember when you turned my first shield into a waterfall? In my defense, you didn't warn me it was coming. I thought we were under attack by an army of deranged snowmen." "Yes, because those are so common in Evergloam." Riven watched, fascinated, as their combined magic created dancing patterns in the air, fire and ice swirling together like nature's own light show. "You know," he mused, deliberately raising the temperature around them while Ayla cooled it, "we've technically mastered the art of portable weather manipulation." The conflicting temperatures created shimmering waves of color overhead, a miniature aurora that painted Ayla's silver hair in rainbow hues. "Useful for picnics," she deadpanned, though her eyes sparkled with appreciation at their impromptu light show. She raised her hands, summoning ice crystals to track the echo's source. The delicate formations caught Riven's ambient heat, transforming into prismatic fragments that scattered rainbow light across the forest floor. "At least they're pretty now," he offered, unable to hide his grin at her exasperated expression. "Like you." "Smooth recovery, Ashmore." But he caught the pleased flush on her cheeks before she turned away. The elder tree's leaves rustled as they passed beneath its ancient branches, creating intricate patterns that mimicked their intertwined magic. The shadows of frost and flame danced across its bark, and Riven could have sworn the old tree was showing off. "Even the tree ships us," he quipped, ducking just in time to avoid the frost-covered pinecone that whizzed past his ear. "Hey. No weaponizing the local flora." "The tree started it," Ayla said primly, but her eyes crinkled with suppressed laughter. A stronger pulse of echo energy thrummed through the air, and they moved without hesitation, years of training and weeks of partnership clicking into place like perfectly fitted puzzle pieces. Ayla's ice formed a crystalline pathway through the underbrush, and instead of melting it, Riven's fire traced along its edges, strengthening the structure with a core of heat that made it gleam like opal. They shared a knowing look, remembering their first disaster of a patrol when he'd accidentally turned her ice bridge into a very scenic waterslide. She'd ended up in a thorn bush, he'd singed his favorite jacket trying to help her out, and they'd both gotten an earful from the elder tree about harmonious cooperation. "Your fire's different now," Ayla observed as they advanced along the path. "More controlled but also warmer somehow. If that makes sense." "Must be the company I keep," Riven replied, squeezing her hand. "Hard to stay volatile when you've got your own personal ice pack." "I'm going to pretend that was romantic, and not just another temperature pun." "You love my temperature puns. They're ice to break the tension." "That's it. I'm breaking up with you." "No, you're not. We're literally tied together by magical destiny ribbons." "I'll find scissors." "They're magic ribbons, remember? Besides," he tugged her closer, delighting in the way frost patterns swirled across her cheeks, "you'd miss this." He demonstrated by carefully raising his body temperature while she lowered hers, creating a perfect bubble of spring-like warmth in the cool night air. Their combined magic sparked and danced around them, turning the forest into their own private light show. "Maybe," she conceded, her cool fingers tracing patterns on his arm that left trails of glittering frost. But only because you're useful for defrosting my tea when it gets too cold. The elder tree's branches swayed overhead, scattering moonlight and magic in equal measure, and Riven couldn't help but think this was exactly where they were meant to be: fire and ice, chaos and control, creating something entirely new together. Riven traced his finger along the delicate ice sculpture Ayla had created, watching as his heat transformed the crystalline surface into swirling patterns rather than melting it completely. He'd finally mastered the art of controlled temperature, mostly. The fact that Ayla's sleeve was still slightly damp from his earlier accidental melting was beside the point. "Remember when you thought I was the most annoying person you'd ever met?" he asked, deliberately letting his power seep into another section of ice, creating a mesmerizing ripple effect. Ayla responded by sending a wave of frost up his sleeve, her lips twitching with barely suppressed amusement. "Who says that's change?" The chill was refreshing against his naturally elevated temperature, and he found himself leaning into it rather than fighting it off. "Your ice says otherwise. It likes me now. My ice is a terrible judge of character." They wandered into a familiar moonlit clearing, and Riven couldn't help but laugh at the memory it evoked. "This is where we created that freak blizzard, isn't it? The one that had Grimble convinced the seasons were broken?" "You mean where you created a blizzard by overreacting to a simple frost ward," Ayla corrected, but her eyes sparkled with shared mirth. Now, instead of chaos, their powers wove together in elegant patterns. Riven's flames caught the edge of her ice crystals, creating prismatic displays that danced through the air like aurora borealis brought down to earth. Steam rose in graceful spirals where their magics met, and the clearing filled with rainbow refractions that made Ayla's silver hair shimmer with otherworldly beauty. A distant pulse of echo energy brushed against his senses, but Riven didn't tense this time. Instead, he pulled Ayla closer, their temperatures automatically adjusting to create a perfect bubble of comfort around them. Her cool presence settled against him like she belonged there, and maybe she did. "Ready for another adventure?" he asked softly, watching the way the magical light played across her features. "As long as you promise not to melt everything I create," she responded, but her tone held warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. To demonstrate her point, she lifted her hands, crafting an intricate ice sculpture in the air between them, a phoenix with its wings spread wide. Riven carefully let his heat flow into the creation, not destroying it but transforming it. The ice took on an opalescent quality, fire seeming to dance within its frozen core. "I'd say I'm getting better at this whole control thing." "Marginally," Ayla conceded, but her smile gave her away. The woods around them hummed with gentle magic as they continued to experiment with their combined powers. Steam rose in elegant columns as Riven's flames chased Ayla's frost, creating patterns that looked like ancient runes written in light. The elder tree's leaves rustled overhead, scattering moonbeams that caught in the magical mist. Riven cupped Ayla's face with one hand, carefully moderating his temperature to match hers. The perfect balance they'd found still amazed him: fire and ice, chaos and control, somehow creating something entirely new together. "We should probably investigate that echo," Ayla murmured, though she made no move to step away from his touch. Riven grinned, letting his fire magic create warm patterns around her frost, watching as they merged into something beautiful rather than fighting for dominance. "Probably," he agreed, before closing the distance between them. Their kiss sent waves of harmonized magic through the clearing. Frost and flame danced together in spectacular displays, neither overpowering the other but creating something greater than either could achieve alone. The elder tree seemed to approve, showering them with golden sparkles that merged with their combined magic to create a private light show in the heart of the Whispering Woods. The echo could wait a few more minutes. Right now, Riven was exactly where he needed to be, holding his own personal winter in his arms while their magic transformed the world around them into something magical and new. Who would have thought that the most irritating ice elemental he'd ever met would turn out to be the missing piece to both his powers and his heart? Not that he'd tell her that last part. She'd probably freeze his hair again. Luce materialized in her sanctuary beneath the Shadowvale Mountains, her usual ethereal composure shattered like the crystal pins that clattered to the obsidian floor. Each falling ornament released a whisper of corrupted magic, filling the chamber with echoes of her failed schemes. "Insufferable phoenix," she muttered, watching her reflection splinter across the crystalline walls. 100 versions of herself stared back, each one showcasing a different shade of barely contained fury. Her perfectly maintained glamour flickered, violet eyes flashing with an otherworldly glow as she paced across ancient stones. The runes beneath her feet pulsed with each step, responding to her rage. Dark tendrils of magic curled around her ankles, seeking to soothe their mistress, but Luce kicked them away with uncharacteristic petulance. All that careful planning. She yanked another pin from her elaborate braid, letting her silvery hair cascade down her back. Months of manipulation within SCREAM, countless favors called in, and it all unravels because of some prophesied. She paused, lips curling into a sneer. Partnership. The word tasted bitter on her tongue. She'd watched them in the resonant heart chamber, witness their elements dance together in perfect harmony. Fire and ice, chaos and order, somehow finding balance where there should have been only destruction. Luce swept her hand across a nearby table, sending ancient artifacts clattering to the ground. A preserved echo caught in a crystal sphere rolled across the floor, its swirling contents casting eerie shadows on the walls. She snatched it up, studying the trapped magical essence with narrowed eyes. Their harmony is temporary, she mused, setting the sphere on an ornate pedestal. Her fingers traced patterns in the air, drawing forth a grimoire bound in shadows and starlight. Its pages fluttered open at her touch, blank parchment filling with spidery script as she spoke. All elements seek their natural state of chaos. The chamber itself seemed to breathe with her words, shadows deepening in the corners while frost crept across the crystalline surfaces. Luce paid no attention to the dramatic display, too focused on unfurling a map of Evergloam's ley lines across her workbench. The magical pathways glowed faintly, creating a web of power across the town's familiar outline. Here, she marked a point where Riven's fire had melted through one of Ayla's frost barriers. And here, another mark where their combined power had disrupted an ancient ward. The council celebrates while their precious town's defenses crack like spring ice. She reached for a lacquered box, its surface decorated with SCREAM's official seals. Inside, perfectly preserved letters and documents detailed council meetings, private conversations, and secrets that could topple the most powerful supernatural figures in Evergloam. Her violet eyes gleamed as she added fresh notes to the collection. "Sebastian thinks he's so clever," she murmured, running a finger along the edge of his official letterhead. "Always playing the noble vampire, never seeing the bigger picture." A cruel smile played across her features as she examined the council member's flowing signature. Some threats can't be solved with pretty speeches about unity and balance. The preserved echo pulsed on its pedestal, drawing her attention. Luce glided over to it, her rage cooling into something more dangerous, calculation. Within the sphere, fragments of the resonant heart's power swirled like caught starlight. She lifted it to eye level, watching the chaos within twist and writhe. "The heart remembers," she whispered to the sphere. "It remembers when elements knew their proper place, when fire burned and ice froze and magic flowed wild and free." Her reflection multiplied again, 100 Lucies speaking in perfect unison. Before councils and rules and artificial harmony. She set the sphere down with deliberate care, then turned to a shelf lined with ancient texts. Her fingers danced across spines bound in materials better left unidentified until she found what she sought. A tome so old its title had worn away to illegibility. The pages fell open to a familiar passage, one that spoke of elemental bonds and prophesied pairs. Luce's lip curled as she read the flowery predictions of harmony and balance. But there, hidden between lines of hope and destiny, she found what she truly sought, the consequences of forcing elements against their nature. "Let them celebrate their little victory," she said, adding notes to her grimoire as shadows danced around her elegant form. "Let them believe their bond can overcome centuries of natural law." Her perfect mask slipped back into place, hiding the darkness beneath. After all, the most entertaining chaos comes from those who think they've found perfect order. Luce approached the scrying pool nestled in the corner of her sanctuary, its obsidian surface reflecting more than mere images. Ripples of possibility danced across the dark water, each one a potential future threading through Evergloam's tapestry. Her initial fury at the day's setback melted into something more calculating, as she traced a finger along the pool's crystalline edge. Well, well, she murmured, watching magical currents shift and swirl in unexpected patterns. Where she'd anticipated stagnation after Riven and Ayla's interference, she found instead a delicious instability. The very harmony they'd created had introduced new fault lines in Evergloam's magical bedrock. Sometimes the most interesting cracks appear after the mending. The pool's surface rippled, showing her flashes of the town's ley lines pulsing with erratic energy. Their attempt to stabilize the resonant heart had succeeded, yes, but success often bred the sweetest kind of chaos. Luce's lips curved into a smile as she watched the magical frequencies clash and realign. She turned to her vanity, an ancient piece carved from midnight stone and veined with starlight. 100 reflections caught her movement as she selected new crystal pins from an ornate box. Each one hummed with untapped power as she wove them into her silver hair, their resonance matching the discordant energies she'd observed in the pool. Let them think they've won, she told her multiplied image, each reflection wearing the same knowing smile. Victory makes them vulnerable. The pins caught the chamber's ethereal light, sending prismatic shadows dancing across the walls. A sudden draft stirred her papers, drawing her attention to her workbench. Luce's nose wrinkled at the distinctly mortal scent that lingered there, processed meat and cheap ink. A greasy wrapper lay crumpled beneath a stack of carefully arranged documents, its garish red and white pattern advertising bacon bliss, now with extra crunch. Oh, Donovan, she chuckled, lifting the wrapper with 2 delicate fingers. Still leaving breadcrumbs, or should I say, bacon bits? Rather than anger at the intrusion, she felt a flutter of amusement. The werewolf journalist had been sniffing around her operations with increasing boldness, never realizing how perfectly he played into her hands. She placed the wrapper in a crystal dish, watching it transform into a delicate origami wolf. The predator who thinks himself the hunter, she mused, never considering he might be the prey. The paper wolf prowled the dish's edge before settling into watchful stillness. Luce moved through her sanctuary with practiced grace, her fingers weaving complex patterns in the air. Boards shimmered into existence, each layer more intricate than the last. Some bent light into dazzling displays that would entrance unwary intruders, while others twisted space itself, creating endless loops and false paths. A maze within a maze, she whispered as the ward settled into place. The magic spread like gossamer threads throughout the chamber, beautiful and deadly in its complexity. Each strand resonated with a different frequency, creating a defensive symphony that would trap any uninvited guests in a dance of their own confusion. The crystal pins in her hair chimed softly as she completed the final ward, their power harmonizing with her protections. She paused before a wall of mirrors, watching the magical currents swirl around her like a cloak of living shadows. Balance is an illusion, she declared, her voice carrying otherworldly power that made the very air tremble. The chamber's crystals caught her words, multiplying them into haunting harmonies that echoed through the space. Chaos is the natural order, and I am its agent. The crystal's song grew louder, a discordant symphony that matched the turbulent energy she'd observed in the scrying pool. Luce gathered her power around her like a mantle of stars and shadow, preparing to depart. Her multiple reflections began to fade one by one, each wearing an identical expression of calculated triumph. "Enjoy your triumph, little flames," she called, her voice resonating through the chamber as her form dissolved into motes of fire light. "Winter's coming, and this time, ice won't be your ally." The last crystal light winked out as she vanished, leaving the sanctuary in darkness. Yet the shadows seemed alive, pulsing with malevolent potential, while the paper wolf in its crystal dish turned 3 times and settled to watch the empty chamber with gleaming origami eyes. Thank you for listening. Please visit me at winvalentine.com to stay up to date. Please subscribe, leave a comment, and review. I love hearing from you.